Chapter 933. Time for fun always passed quickly. Unknowingly, New Year's Day was coming. Zhang Hai and the others were not idle these days. They ate what they wanted to eat and played. They saw ice lanterns, snow sculptures, went skiing, and ate pig dishes. After resting at home for a day, it was New Year's Eve. However, on New Year's Eve, Zhang Hai did not meet Qili at home. Instead, he went to Qili's house. Now that Zhang Hai's parents were gone, it was New Year's Eve. How could he not have an elder with him? And most importantly, Zhang Hai said that he would go to Feng Yunshan's house on the third day of New Year's Eve, so it was inevitable that he would go to Qili's house on New Year's Eve. This morning, after Zhang Hai arranged for Azalina and the others, he and Qili drove to Qili's house. After parking the car, Zhang Hai and Qili walked to the door of the house and knocked. Not long after, the door opened from the inside. Zhang Hai saw Xiao Yi several times before, and she was still wearing the maid costume. It seemed that she liked it very much. According to Qi Jie's words, she really liked this kind of clothes. Her wardrobe was full of such clothes, but the colors were different. After seeing Zhang Hai and Qili, the corners of Zheng Xiao's mouth couldn't help but curl up. Then, she immediately withdrew it. "Uncle and the others are at home," Zheng Xiao whispered to Zhang Hai and Qili after glancing behind her. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai and Qili couldn't help but look at each other. What were they doing here? Zheng Xiao was adopted by the Qi family since she was young, so she also called them by the Qi family's children. She was referring to Qi Song. Since Qi Song was here, Qi Yuanlong and Qi Liangkai were probably here as well. Although she didn't know what they were doing here, this was Qi Li's home. Out of curiosity, she walked in first. Zhang Hai also walked in. After changing into slippers, the two walked into the hall. As soon as they walked in, they saw the situation in the hall. There were a total of 9 people in the hall. It was very lively. There were 4 men and 5 women. Among them, the ones sitting on the main sofa were Zhang Hai's mother-in-law and 2 sisters-in-law. The other people were sitting next to them, but judging from the attitude of Qi Jie and Qia, they obviously didn't care about these relatives. At this time, Qia was fiddling with the tea, but she wasn't drinking it for others. She was drinking it herself. As for Qi Jie, she put her 2 straight legs on the coffee table in front of her. She was half lying on the sofa playing with her mobile phone. When she heard the footsteps, she couldn't help but raise her head. After seeing Zhang Hai, she smiled. She knew that Zhang Hai was here. She couldn't make any waves here. When they saw Zhang Hai, the other 6 people's faces didn't look too good. Especially Qi Jingtao, who was beaten by me. When he saw Zhang Hai walk in, he subconsciously shrank back. "Oh, it's so lively. Uncle, why did third uncle think of coming to our house today?" Looking at the situation in the room, Qili couldn't help but smile and say with a strong disdain in her eyes. She knew the situation of these 2 families. Since they were driven out of the Qi group by Zhang Hai, the shareholders' lives were quite miserable. A few of them got the money before they went bankrupt. This was because they used their status as shareholders of the Qi group to borrow a lot of money from banks or loan sharks. In the past, the Qi group was there to support them, and the annual dividends and interest were enough. These people didn't dare to come and force them to pay back the money. But after they were no longer shareholders, it was hard to say. There were also some who had side businesses. In the past, they used their status as shareholders of the Qi group to suppress their peers or had any conflicts with the government. Now they were all back, just like how Zhang Hai wanted to buy oil futures at the beginning. No matter how much money you had to have the ability to protect yourself first. The status as a shareholder of the Qi group was the best protection. For example, Zhang Hai's biggest protection now was his status as a shareholder of Google. Therefore, there were less than 3 people whose shares were bought by Zhang Hai in the past who could enjoy the new year this year. Qi Song and Qi Yuanlong's situation was slightly better than these people, but it was not much better. Although Qi Song had lost his position as a shareholder of Qi Enterprise, it was not considered a serious injury to him. At most, it could be considered as an internal injury, which was quite painful. But then, he knew that he was unlucky. His main business was some peripheral supply business. With his status as a shareholder of the Qi Group, he had many factories under his name. These factories were all dedicated to the Qi Group. Although there was no mention of purposely raising the price or selling shoddy products, at least these factories relied on the Qi Group to make money. Now that he was no longer a shareholder of the Qi Group, Zhang Hai directly asked the departments under him to buy from other factories. The cost was lower and the quality was better. Because of this, Qi Song's vitality was greatly damaged. Last year, he had earned 800 million in dividends at the end of the year. It wasn't just the Qi Group. His factories were the biggest. But this year, he lost 60 million. In other words, after Zhang Hai took away his shares this year, he lost 60 million in just a few months. His net loss was about 400 million. When this figure came out, he was hospitalized. It was just the day before yesterday. And Qi Yuanlong was not as good as Qi Song. No matter what, Qi Song still had a business, but Qi Yuanlong had nothing. His main income was the dividends from the Qi Group, some of his own money in the company, and some of the filial piety from the managers who relied on him. But now that his shares were gone, his dividends were gone, the money in his hands in the branch was gone, and the people who relied on him were all kicked out of the company. He was now penniless. Of course, he still had some savings in the bank. But his family had always been extravagant. Now, they had to rely on their savings to run out. He couldn't bear it. So after knowing that Qi Song was hospitalized, he went to take a look and made an appointment. After Qi Song was discharged, he planned to visit the Qi family. Although they had lost, they could still take advantage of their seniority. Compared to money and status, what was face? So they came today. Qi Song still came with his son, Qi Liangkai, and Qi Yuanlong also came with his son, daughter-in-law, and wife. But these people were used to being arrogant. They didn't know whether it was because they wanted to strike first or because they were used to being arrogant. As soon as they came, they said arrogantly to Qi Li's mother, "Your daughter is a good daughter. Your son-in-law is simply a bastard. He took my shares. I'm telling you, return my shares to me immediately." After hearing this, the group of people in the Qi family was stunned. They had seen shameless people before, but they had never seen such shameless people. Just when the two sides were in a deadlock, Zhang Hai and Qi Li came back. Seeing them enter the house, Qi Jie and Qi Ye completely ignored them. Although they also had shares of the Qi Group, they had never cared about it. Now they just handed it over to Zhang Hai. "Qi Li and you, we're here to take back our things." Seeing Zhang Hai and Qi Li coming in, the group of people here looked quite embarrassed, especially when they saw Zhang Hai. It was this guy who had caused them to be so miserable. "Your things? What are your things? Does our family owe you anything?" Hearing Qi Song's words, Qi Li smiled disdainfully, then walked over and sat next to her mother. Qi Li's mother, who was originally at a loss, saw her daughter coming over and stopped talking. Now, Qi Li was naturally in charge of this family. "Don't play dumb with us. We're talking about our family shares. You swallowed them just like that. Aren't you going to give us some explanation?" At this time, Qi Jingtao, who had been hiding in the back, came out and shouted loudly. After all, in his opinion, the Qi Group should be his. Now, Qi Li and Zhang Hai not only took over the Qi Group that originally belonged to him, but also swallowed the shares that originally belonged to him. What was this called? This was called usurping the throne. Forgive him, he was really not very smart. Swallowed? Sorry, I seem to have heard someone farting. I remember that I bought it with money. Do you want to see the contract? At this time, Zhang Hai walked over and sat on a sofa casually. He looked at the people in front of him and said calmly. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, these people's faces changed greatly and became more and more ugly, especially Qi Song, whose face was already a little dark. "Those shares belong to us. You're forcing us to buy and sell them." Gritting his teeth, Qi Song looked at Zhang Hai angrily and said, originally, in his opinion, Zhang Hai was just a rascal, a shield, and a dispensable person. In other words, Zhang Hai was also a puppet, a tool. His existence was only to let Qi Li safely hand over the company. That was all. But now, this bastard had unknowingly become a behemoth that even he had to look up to. What the hell was this?
Why?
No matter what, it was difficult for him to accept. What are you talking about? That was decided by the board of directors. It had nothing to do with me. I just wanted to buy the shares, and then the board of directors decided on the spot to sell me so much. What's wrong with that? I have already transferred the cash to your cards, one hand for the shares, a fair trade. Looking at the crowd in front of him, Jiang Hai smiled and then said very indifferently. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the faces of the people here were quite ugly. Jiang Hai did it step by step according to the legal procedures, leaving them with no words to refute. If they can't be reasoned with, then they can only pester endlessly. You see, is this the tone you should use when talking to your elders? Pointing at Jiang Hai, Qi Song roared at Qi Li's mother. Hearing his words, Qi Li's mother smiled indifferently. Chapter 934. I'm a very traditional woman. When my husband is still alive, I naturally have to listen to my husband. When my husband is no longer alive, I have to listen to my son and daughter. Jiang Hai is my son-in-law, just like my son. Therefore, his words and decisions also represent my decisions. Looking at Qi Song, Qi Li's mother stood firmly on Jiang Hai's side this time. This was because she was not related to Qi Song and Qi Yuanlong. If Qi Li's father was still alive, Jiang Hai would not have to worry about this matter. However, Qi Li's father was not around, so this matter was decided by Qi Li's mother. It did not matter. The reason why she made concessions a few years ago was that Qi Li had not yet secured her position. Therefore, she needed to make them behave, so that Qi Li could have more time. However, Jiang Hai had descended from the heavens and directly swept all the internal threats out of the company. Thus, it had nothing to do with Qi Song and Qi Yuanlong. She smiled at them because she had taught them well. If they wanted to pester endlessly, sorry, she was not in charge. This is your attitude. Seeing that Qi Li's mother in front of them had spoken, Qi Song and the others were stunned. Qi Song pointed at the people in front of him with a trembling hand and roared with a face full of unwillingness. It should be known that Qi Song and Qi Yuanlong both coveted the Qi group. In Qi Yuanlong's opinion, the company should be like the Song dynasty. Song Taizu is dead, so his younger brother, who is still in his prime, should inherit the company. Moreover, this was the Hua dynasty, where males were preferred over females. Since he had a son and Qi Li was a daughter, then this company should be inherited by his son because it was a tradition. It was inevitable that the company would only be passed down to males and not females. It had to be said that he was thinking too much. On the other hand, Qi Song had always thought that the reason why Qi Li's father was able to come out was because he had brought him to the capital to do business. In the end, Qi Song did not rise, but Qi Li's father did. It was only because Qi Li's father had taken advantage of him that the Qi group should belong to him, not just a little bit of shares. With such a perverted mentality, the two of them believed that the Qi family should be theirs. Shameless people were truly invincible. No matter what people do, they have to ask why. When Qi Li's father died, he clearly had a daughter. Moreover, the daughter had grown up and could inherit the company. Why should it be passed to your son? Just because you said that you gave birth to a son? If Qi Li's father knew about this, he would probably jump out from the underworld. Your son is not his son. Why should he give the company to you? As for Qi Song, he was even more shameless. He didn't have the ability and didn't have the pressure to start a company. In the end, someone else had done it, and he wanted to take advantage of it? Who do you think you are? Qi Yuanlong was still considered a blood relative. You were just a cousin who had been separated from him since the previous generation. How could you have the nerve to come out and say such things? However, the problem now was that the two of them were so shameless. They just thought that you owed them, so this was theirs. Therefore, people's hearts could never be satisfied. These guys were really not good people. Ahem, this is our attitude. If you are here because you are relatives and want to come over for the new year, then everything is fine. If not, the door is over there. I won't see you off. Hearing Qi Song's words, Jiang Hai also said with a smile, Who do you think you are? Do you have the right to speak here? This is the Qi family's business. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Song's son, Qi Liangkai, who had been silent all this time, finally couldn't help but look at Jiang Hai with a sullen face. It is indeed not appropriate for a son-in-law like me to intervene in the Qi family's business. However, the problem now is that you are talking about the Qi family's business. I am the biggest shareholder of the Qi family, so do you think this matter has something to do with me? Looking at Qi Liangkai, Jiang Hai also gave tit for tat and said to him without any courtesy. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Liangkai choked for a moment. This is troublesome. F***ck. Why are you so arrogant? Do you believe that I will burn your house down for you? Seeing that Jiang Hai had made everyone speechless, Qi Jingtao couldn't stand it anymore. He had a bad temper, so he shouted on the spot. However, when they heard his words, the faces of both sides were a little ugly. Running to someone else's house during the new year and saying that you want to burn your house down, hee. This is not talking about business, but looking for trouble. After Qi Jie heard this, she also put her phone aside. She also knew martial arts. Looking at Qi Jingtao, she was ready to teach him a lesson. Seeing her like this, Jiang Hai also coughed. It was better for him to say this. You can do whatever you want. You smoke, so you should have a lighter in your pocket. You can light it. It's just a villa. You should know a little about my financial resources. I can buy 10,000 villas like this. Of course, it's a pity to light it up. As a reward, you can spend the rest of your life in prison. Don't worry, if I say you will spend the rest of your life, you will spend the rest of your life. Looking at Qi Jingtao, Jiang Hai's eyes narrowed, and then he said indifferently. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the three people from Qi Yuanlong's family couldn't help but tense up. Braggart 13, if you have the ability, you can catch me. If you have the ability, you can kill me. Come on, kill me. Let's see if you dare. However, among these three people, Qi Jingtao was clearly not included. When this guy heard Jiang Hai's words, he was even more stubborn. He straightened his neck and shouted there. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai looked at him with a smile. You first tell me, why don't I dare? You can tell me, do I not have the ability, or do I not have the money? Looking at Qi Jingtao, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. This ruffian look wasn't something that an average person could learn. You. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Jingtao was also stunned for a moment. He knew that Jiang Hai was ruthless. He also knew that Jiang Hai was rich. He naturally also knew that Jiang Hai's influence was quite big. Even the third generation of the Red family didn't dare to touch him. It could be seen that his influence in the country was also not small. Not to mention, he was now a major shareholder of the Qi group. Even if it was just this identity, if he told the judge or something, he could stay in prison for the rest of his life. Suddenly, he thought that Jiang Hai seemed to be able to do it. If you have the guts, then do it. See how everyone looks at you. However, since he had already come here, it was not his style to admit defeat like this. Looking at Jiang Hai, he continued to straighten his neck and shout. You idiot, I've already done it. Why would I care about how others look at me? What's more, my business is in the United States. I only come back a few days a year. Why would anyone go against me because of you? He shook his head in amusement. He really didn't know what this guy's brain was made of. Why was he like a child? Had he just entered junior high school? Thinking about it, it was probably the same. You. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Jingtao was really at a loss. If he had a temper now, he would really go and set the house on fire. However, if he set the house on fire, thinking about staying in prison for the rest of his life, he would. Hey, Jiang Hai, we're all family. You're being too harsh with your words. Jingtao has been spoiled by us all these years. He's a little agitated. Don't take it to heart. At this moment, Zhang Yu, who had been sitting next to them, spoke up. Jiang Hai had introduced Zhang Yu to him. She was Qi Yuanlong's wife. Of course, she was not the first wife. Counting her age, she was only 3 years older than Qi Li. She used to be a third-rate celebrity. She always dressed up gorgeously and was quite good-looking. Otherwise, she would not have been able to charm the old pervert Qi Yuanlong. Naturally, she did not follow Qi Yuanlong for love or anything like that. She was only interested in money. However, now that Qi Yuanlong had no money, she was also very anxious. In fact, she was the one who chose to join forces with Qi Song from the beginning. When Jiang Hai first came here and met these two families, Qi Song and Qi Yuanlong were clearly not in the same group. At that time, Qi Song was still within Zhongwu, while Qi Wulong was more neutral and did not participate in anything. When they met for the second time, the two of them got together. This woman named Zhang Yu had contributed a lot. Now that the negotiations were about to collapse, she could not sit still. If Qi Yuanlong was really kicked out of the Qi family, she would not be able to accept it. I say, sister-in-law, look at Yuanlong. He's not young anymore. He values his reputation very much. Most importantly, our family doesn't have much income. We can't just sit there and wait. Seeing that Jiang Hai's side was not easy to deal with, Zhang Yu looked at Qi Li's mother. At this time, the man's words were too harsh. It was time for her to step in. These days, Yuanlong has been sighing at home every day after losing his shares. He can't talk about his elder brother. I also know that Yuanlong did some things wrong, but after all, Yuanlong is his elder brother's biological younger brother, isn't he? Seeing that she had softened her tone, Qi Li's mother's gaze was not so resolute.
Zhang Yu continued to speak.
Sister-in-law, I really want these shares. At worst, I'll return the money I received and treat it as if I bought them again. What do you think? Seeing that Qi Li's mother's gaze was a little evasive, Qi Yuanlong was not stupid and immediately spoke up. At this time, Qi Song and Qi Liangkai did not say anything. This was their goal. Although it seemed that they had lost face, as long as they could get back the shares, this was the most important thing. Losing face could be earned in the future. But if the shares were gone, it was really gone. As long as Qi Yuanlong tore a hole here, Qi Li's mother would not be able to refuse his family's share. Third uncle, it's not that we don't want to sell it to you, but we're afraid that you can't afford it now. However, before Qi Li's mother could say anything, Qi Li had already said it with a smile. Then, she looked at her third uncle with a somewhat playful gaze. This third uncle was really taking advantage of her. Want to buy back the shares at the original price? It had to be said that they were dreaming. Chapter 935.
What?
Do you still want to earn our money? Hearing Qi Li's words, Qi Song's complexion instantly changed. His face was gloomy as he spoke. In his opinion, Jiang Hai and Qi Li should have given them the shares for free. They should have knelt down and begged for the shares. If they didn't want it, then they should have knelt down and begged for it. Of course, uncle, are you still dreaming? Hearing Qi Song's words, Qi Li raised her eyebrows. Is he crazy about money? Phew, tell me, how much do you want? I'll tell you, but don't go too far. Qi Song glared at Qi Li and said angrily. But hearing his words, Qi Li smiled disdainfully. What do you mean by going too far? She didn't think she was going too far. At present, the Qi Group has already been delisted. According to the listing price, and the price of the 4 companies that have been merged into the Qi Group, the current market price of the Qi Group is 71.7 billion renminbi.
I won't cheat you.
According to the market price, 1% of the shares is 717 million renminbi. However, because you are my relatives, I won't cheat you. Now that I've said it, I won't sell less than 10% of the shares, and it's only valid for now. Now, if you take out 7,170 million renminbi, you are still shareholders of the Qi Group, so you can't take it out. Sorry, the door is over there. Looking at Qi Song and the others in front of her, Qi Li said very calmly. Hearing Qi Li's words, everyone's face changed instantly. How could they take out 71.1 billion yuan? Now? Is this guy joking? And 71.7 billion yuan? What the hell is this? Since Jiang Hai got the shares of the Qi Group, Qi Li had been preparing for the delisting. The delisting was completed before the new year. Now, the Qi Group was a completely private enterprise. It didn't sell shares, and there were no extra shareholders. All the property rights were fixed. Of course, this also prevented other forces from interfering. The Qi Group also became the sole owner of Zhang Hai. Then Qi Li asked for Zhang Hai's opinion and merged the 4 Western steak restaurants opened by Qi Li and Zhang Hai into the Qi Group. Once the 4 tax-free Western restaurants were merged into the Qi Group, the value of the Qi Group instantly increased by 1/3. Originally, because of the integration, the market value had increased a lot. At this time, it broke through the sky. Before the new year, the Lu Group stock price had exceeded 70 billion yuan. It looked good in China, but in fact, it was average internationally. Compared to the companies in the United States that had hundreds of billions of dollars, which were converted into trillions of yuan, the Qi Group was actually insignificant. As for the truly big companies in the country, they were all owned by those countries. The private Qi Group was actually not bad. At present, the price of the Qi Group after the merger of the 4 steak restaurants was adjusted as follows. Zhang Hai's original 23% shares became 37%, and he was currently the largest shareholder of the Qi Group. Qi Li's shares were 22.6%. Lu Jie and Qi Ye each accounted for 8.2%, and Qi Li's mother, Zhang Hai's mother-in-law, accounted for 15.3%. Zhang Hai's family alone accounted for 91.3% of the Qi Group shares. Now, if Qi Song and Qi Yuanlong could really sell for 14 billion yuan, it didn't matter to give them 20%. After all, this was a very fair price. However, after hearing Qi Li's words, Qi Song and Qi Yuanlong's faces were gloomy. Even Qi Zhengtao and Qi Liangkai looked at Qi Li in front of them with some surprise. In their opinion, Qi Li was crazy about money. 7 billion? When they left, they only received less than 2 billion yuan. Now, they wanted 7 billion yuan back. Qi Li was not selling shares, she was robbing money. Qi Li, you've really improved. Scamming money, scamming your uncles. Do you still have the face? Do you still know that we are your elders? Do you still know that your surname is Qi? Qi Song was so angry that he laughed. He pointed his trembling finger at Qi Li in front of him and said angrily. He never thought that Qi Li would be so ruthless as to directly ask for 7 billion yuan. Moreover, it was cash. Where would they get the cash? As mentioned before, Qi Yuanlong was a sitting duck. In the past few months, he had been spending like before. It could be said that he had already spent half of the money that Zhang Hai gave him. Now, not to mention 7 billion, he didn't even have 700 million yuan. This time, he came here to act shamelessly. He wanted to use his face to ask for the shares. As for Qi Song, his total family assets were 7 billion yuan. However, because of the huge impact, his cash was basically invested in his own factory to maintain the normal operation of the factory. How could he have 7 billion yuan now? It would be good if he had 70 million yuan in cash that he could use. 7 billion yuan? How could Qi Li say that? Don't talk nonsense if you don't understand. If you think that I'm overselling, you can find someone to calculate it yourself. I think LVC should know how much the Qi family is worth now. If you have money, take it out now and give me 10% of the shares. If you don't have money and want to stay for the new year, stay obediently. If you don't want to, leave. It's that simple. Seeing that Qi Song was still unwilling to give up, Qi Li said impatiently. Hearing Qi Li's words, Qi Song and Qi Yuanlong's words were blocked. Look, they're quarreling again. They're all relatives. I say, Xiao Li, can you... Seeing that the situation was getting out of control again, Qi Li's third aunt, Zhang Yu, couldn't help but appear again and wanted to smooth things over. However, before she finished speaking, Zhang Hai had already stretched out his hand and motioned for her to stop. Third aunt, right? Money in one hand and shares in the other. It's a fair transaction. We're all relatives. Don't say that you owe me or give me face. The reason why Qi Li is willing to sell is because the few of you in front of her are her relatives. According to our original statement, these shares would rather rot than be sold. Hearing Zhang Hai's resolute words, Zhang Yu also smiled brightly and swallowed the rest of her words. For a moment, the situation was really a little awkward. Qi Yuanlong's face showed some regret. He knew that Zhang Hai's words just now meant that he had no fate with the Qi family. If he had known this would happen, Why did he seek death in the first place? Why did he want to occupy the Chi family? Wasn't he doing a good job as his third uncle? He could go out and indulge in debauchery all day long, and if something happened, there would be someone to clean up his mess for him. How could he be so obsessed to think that his son, who could not do anything but spoiled everything, could inherit the Chi family? Although he was a man, but now it seemed that his son was not just a little bit worse than Chili. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but sigh. This time it was really troublesome. On the other hand, Chi Song's face was livid. Unlike Chi Yuanlong's regret, he had nothing to regret. This was because from the beginning, his goal was to occupy the Chi family. Now that he didn't succeed, there was nothing he could do. Winner takes all. When he couldn't even keep his shares, he had already lost completely. Let's go. Looking at Jiang Hai and Qi Li's tough attitude, Qi Song waved his hand and stood up directly. He walked out with Qi Liangkai. This relatives had come to an end today. Qi Yuanlong glanced at Jiang Hai and his family in front of him and couldn't help but stand up and sigh. Sister-in-law, if I've done anything wrong in the past, I'll apologize in advance. Let's go. After saying this to Qi Li's mother, Qi Yuanlong also left with his family. LVC, do you have any thoughts of returning to the Qi family? However, when they were about to walk out of the door, Qi Li thought for a moment. Her third uncle was indeed quite hateful, but he was her third uncle after all. Therefore, at the last moment, she was a little soft-hearted. However, she was very unwilling to let Qi Yuanlong or Qi Jingtao, who were ambitious but not talented, return to the Qi family. However, she could consider LVC.
Father.
After hearing Qi Li's words, LVC, who had been silent all this time, glanced at Qi Yuanlong and her husband, Qi Jingtao. Hearing LVC call him father, Qi Yuanlong also sighed. LVC will go after the new year. After saying this, Qi Yuanlong stepped forward and walked forward. He knew that this was a benefit from Qi Li. Although after LVC went, there would definitely be no filial piety, but if something really happened, LVC would be able to take care of the Qi family. This was considered as Qi Li leaving a back door for their family. Thinking of this, Qi Yuanlong shook his head. He was really embarrassed and then walked out of the door. Seeing that these uninvited guests had been sent away, Qi Jie and Qi couldn't help but look at each other. In addition to joy in their eyes, there was also a trace of fear. It should be known that in Jiang Hai's family, they were on equal footing with AI Xiaoxi. There was no difference in strength between the two groups of forces, but if Qi Li, the legal wife, really came today, they had also seen her methods. They were afraid that when the time came, their status would be lowered. Of course, they were not worried that Qi Li would drive them away. After all, with Jiang Hai's protection, Qi Li would not dare to do so. Moreover, they were sisters. However, with such a big shot above them, their lives would not be easy. It's the new year, and something like this happened. Sai, let's not talk about it. Come. Jiang Hai, sit down. Have you eaten breakfast? I'm here to see you. I haven't seen you for a while. You're getting stronger and stronger. Seeing that the atmosphere was still not very good after the guests left, Qi Li's mother could not help but laugh. She took the initiative to adjust the atmosphere in the room. Mom, I eat beef every day. Naturally, my body is as strong as a cow. Hearing his mother-in-law's words, Jiang Hai also laughed and made a muscular gesture. Looking at him, everyone laughed. This was more like the new year. Chapter 936. As the atmosphere at home gradually became lively, Jiang Hai and Qi Li returned to their original state again. They chatted together, watched TV, and so on. However, Jiang Hai, Qi Jie, and Qi were somewhat awkward. Yes, it would be strange if they weren't awkward. Jiang Hai could only laugh at this. Nothing happened for the day. In the evening, the whole family watched TV together and made dumplings with Zheng Xiao. They stayed until the end of the year. Although the recent New Year's Gala was getting more and more boring, the New Year's Gala was more like a ceremony. If they were alone, it didn't matter, but if the whole family was together, then they really had to go and watch the New Year's Gala. The programs on TV weren't good, but they were chatting and laughing. It was also quite good. After working until midnight, they went outside to set off a string of firecrackers. Because Zhonghai's mourning period had passed 3 years this year, and Qili's mourning period had also passed 3 years, there was no need to ban the New Year's couplets and firecrackers. Zhonghai himself wasn't particularly interested in setting off firecrackers. He just wanted to join in the fun. With the sound of the firecrackers, it indicated that the past year had come to an end, and a new year had arrived. In the evening, Zhonghai naturally went back to the room with Qili to sleep. Because it was a little late tonight, there was no extra activity. After washing up, Zhonghai hugged Qili and went to sleep. The next morning, it was the first day of the new year. Qili's family didn't have the habit of New Year's greeting, so it was as usual. It was just a very plain day, watching TV, playing on the computer, and surfing the internet. The day passed quickly. However, at night, Zhonghai was not so honest. After dealing with Qili, he went to Qijie and Qia's place. After all, they had been separated for a while, and, to be honest, it was inexplicably exciting. The next day, on the second day of Chinese New Year, Zhonghai and Qili went back to his villa. The third day of Chinese New Year was supposed to be the time to go back to her parents' house, but Zhonghai had already said that he would go to Feng Yunshan's house on the third day. So today, Qili went back to her mother's house by herself. Actually, Qili didn't need to go to her mother's house today. Because she would spend the new year there, it didn't matter whether she went back to her mother's home or not. But after all, there was still some estrangement between her and Zhonghai's family. When Zhonghai was here, it was fine. But when Zhonghai wasn't here, she felt that she was a little redundant. These girls were more or less afraid of her, so she didn't have any intention to do anything. So in the morning, Zhonghai went to Feng Yunshan's house, and she went back to her mother's house. Of course, in order to appease the Empress, Zhonghai deliberately sent her home first. After she arrived home, Zhonghai drove to the nearby supermarket to buy some gifts. He had to admit that the new year wasn't too important in China now. This could be seen from the shops. A long time ago, Zhonghai remembered that when he was young, about 10 years ago. At that time, he was already in junior high school and had some spare money. His parents didn't take away his money that year. So during the new year, he remembered that it was the 5th day of the new year, and he wanted to go to the bookstore to buy some comic books. But on the 5th day of the new year, Bing City was quiet. He waited for about half an hour before a bus came out. He went to Xinhua bookstore, but it was still closed. He was hungry and wanted to eat something, but no restaurants were open. It was the new year, and he couldn't even have a good meal. Of course, those top-notch restaurants were still open, but he couldn't afford it. In the end, he found a noodle restaurant that was still open. He ate some noodles and went home. Although there was nothing on the streets at that time, the New Year atmosphere was still there. Now that it was the new year, it was really too easy to buy things. Whether it was restaurants, supermarkets, or some private fruit stores, they were all open. This was incomparable to before. Since it was Zhonghai's first visit, he had to prepare a lot of things. Before he came, he had asked Feng Yunshan what his parents liked. After all, he was married in the past, so he knew the basic 3-piece set. A carton of good cigarettes and 2 bottles of good wine. When he went to Qili's house, he got this set. But now he had money, and he changed it to a carton of good cigarettes and 2 cartons of good wine. He didn't buy the best ones. The cigarettes were soft Zhonghua, and the wine were flying Maotai and Wuliangya. Although in the eyes of ordinary people, these things were already very good, in Zhonghai's eyes, these things were really not good. Not to mention other things, just his red wine alone. Even if the lowest price was $800, it was nearly 5,000 renminbi. Ordinary bottles of Flying Maotai and Wuliangya didn't have such a price. A bottle of Maotai was about 1,000 renminbi, and Wuliangya was more than 800 renminbi. There were 6 bottles in one bottle. Zhonghai's 2 bottles of red wine were equivalent to these 2 cartons of wine. In addition to these 3 cartons of things, Zhonghai also specially brought 2 bottles of his own red wine, some beef, and the best quality abalones that he sent after refrigeration. These abalones were the super best in his manner. Basically, each of them was a 2-headed abalone. They could only be bigger than this, not smaller. Even if they were more than the market caddy, They couldn't withstand Jiang Hai's spirit, right? The quality of things was more important than the quantity, but these things were already quite a lot. Driving Qi Li's BMW, Jiang Hai brought these things to Feng Yunshan's home community. Driving far away, he saw that it was snowing heavily. Feng Yunshan was waiting for Jiang Hai outside the community at this time. Their community was considered a good community among the mid-range in Bingcheng. Naturally, the security of the community was also good. It was not so easy for foreign vehicles to enter. They needed to be brought in by people in the community. Seeing Jiang Hai's BMW, although she knew that it was Qi Li's, Feng Yunshan still greeted him with a smile. Looking at Jiang Hai, who stopped the car and walked out, she plunged into Jiang Hai's arms. Hee, did you miss me? Looking up at Jiang Hai, Feng Yunshan said with a smile. Just a little bit. Hearing Feng Yunshan's words, Jiang Hai also gestured, but he only got a pink fist in return. After fooling around for a while, Feng Yunshan took Jiang Hai to the guard. After registering, they drove the car in. Parking the car downstairs of Feng Yunshan's home, Jiang Hai got out of the car and felt that someone was looking at him. But when he looked up, that feeling disappeared. He thought that it might be the residents of this building. Then Jiang Hai and Feng Yunshan began to move the gifts prepared by Jiang Hai out of the car one by one. From time to time, some neighbors passed by and looked at the gifts prepared by Jiang Hai. Some of them secretly clicked their tongues. Indeed, for ordinary people, these gifts were indeed too expensive. But looking at Jiang Hai's BMW, these people were silent. One by one, they were stunned and looked at Jiang Hai. After moving everything, Jiang Hai also locked the car and walked into the corridor with Feng Yunshan. Feng Yunshan's home was bought not long ago. It was about 4 or 5 years ago, so it was an elevator apartment. But although it was an elevator apartment, Feng Yunshan's parents didn't like to live too high up. According to Feng Yunshan, once, her parents went to her aunt's house to play. As a result, her aunt's house lived on the 31st floor. The key was that the elevator was broken. They thought that since they were already here, they would just climb up. After climbing up that time, her parents never mentioned the problem of living on a high floor again. So when she decided to buy a house, her parents chose this 4-story one. According to them, even if the elevator was broken, they didn't have to climb too high, right? Soon, the elevator came to the 4th floor. Jiang Hai also walked out with several large boxes. Feng Yunshan was only responsible for taking the wine, abalone, and beef. The 3 boxes were Jiang Hai's. With Jiang Hai's current strength, the 3 boxes were not heavy, but it would definitely block his vision. He staggered all the way to the door. Just as he knocked on the door was opened from the inside. "Ai, you're here. It seems that you're here. You brought so many things. You're too polite." When the door opened, a middle-aged woman's face appeared from inside. She looked at Jiang Hai. Her face was about to wrinkle as she said with a smile, "Hello, Auntie. It's my first time here. I don't know what you like, so I just bought some. Some of them are produced at my place." Hearing the middle-aged woman's words, Jiang Hai also put down the box and looked at her with a smile. He naturally knew that this was Feng Yunshan's mother because he had seen her at a parent-teacher conference when he was in school. Although he didn't have much of an impression of her, after all, he and Feng Yunshan didn't have much interaction at the beginning. However, he was still familiar with her when they met. Come in, come in." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Feng Yunshan's mother also smiled and let Jiang Hai in. Of course, before Jiang Hai came in, he also moved everything in. Then Feng Yunshan led Jiang Hai to the living room. At this time, in the living room, a man with a slightly dark face was sitting there watching TV. When he saw Jiang Hai coming over, he also stood up and forced a smile on his face, but he didn't say anything. "This is my dad. You should have seen him." Feng Yunshan was obviously very satisfied that this man could squeeze out a smile on his face. After saying this to Jiang Hai with a smile, she took Jiang Hai's arm and took him to sit on the sofa next to him. "Little Jiang, TSK, I saw you at that time. You were not a good student at that time. I often heard that your class teacher criticized you at the parent-teacher conference, but who would have thought that it would be like this? The troublemaker from the beginning is now promising." Sitting on the sofa, Looking at Jiang Hai, Feng Yunshin's father couldn't help but say with some emotion. Chapter 937. Ugh, hee hee, that was because I wasn't sensible at the beginning. Now, ugh, I guess I still can't learn, haha. Hearing Feng Yunshin's father's words, Jiang Hai touched his nose awkwardly and said with a smile, "Everyone has their own ambitions. If you learned well at the beginning, you wouldn't be who you are today." Hearing Jiang Hai's words that were not hypocritical, Feng Yunshin's father also said with a smile. In fact, he was basically satisfied with Jiang Hai. He was tall. Although he wasn't very handsome, he wasn't bad either. He was just an ordinary person. His family was quite rich. If Feng Yunshin could really marry such a person, it would be really good. But unfortunately, he was already married, and the other party was the boss of a large group. He couldn't get a divorce. It was a pity. Before Jiang Hai came, Feng Yunshin more or less told her parents that she could talk about Jiang Hai's situation. Of course, she didn't say everything. What she said was relatively good. For example, Jiang Hai's current family background, how much he could earn in a year, his influence in the United States, and of course, more importantly, his relationship with Qi Li. How hard Jiang Hai was at the beginning. He was with Qi Li. Qi Li gave him money, but she didn't treat him as her man. She went to the company on the second day of marriage, and so on. But after all, Qi Li was kind to Jiang Hai, so Jiang Hai couldn't get a divorce. Of course, this was the situation a long time ago. Now, how many people were in Jiang Hai's family? Feng Yunshin deliberately avoided it.
It was better not to talk about this thing.
So although she was a mistress, Feng Yunshin's parents' opposition was much lower than at the beginning. Now, it seemed that Jiang Hai was also a successful person and he was not bad. He could also be entrusted. Looking at his appearance, Feng Yunshin wouldn't be bullied by him. This was the most important thing, so her father, who had always been at odds with Feng Yunshin, was also kind to Jiang Hai. Come, clean up and get ready to eat. While Jiang Hai and Feng Yunshin's father were chatting, Feng Yunshin's mother had almost finished cooking. People in the Northeast paid attention to a good new year, so they basically cooked 6, 8, 10, 12 dishes. Even if there were only one person in the family, there would be 6 dishes. This had nothing to do with wastage. This was a habit of Bing City's people. Today, Feng Yunshin's mother also had such extravagance. Although there were only 4 people, they cooked 8 dishes. Braised carp meant that there would be more every year. Braised pig trotters meant that there would be a lot of money. There were also many home-cooked cold dishes, stewed pork ribs, fried chicken wings, braised pork knuckles, stir-fried cauliflower, stir-fried zucchini. These 8 dishes filled the table. After Jiang Hai and the rest sat down, they were a little polite and started to eat. But because Jiang Hai drove here, he didn't drink. He just chatted at the table and talked nonsense with Feng Yunshin's father. Feng Yunshin's father was still very curious about the United States. In fact, it wasn't only Feng Yunshin's father who was curious. After knowing that Jiang Hai's business was in the United States, most people were very curious. After all, it was a foreign land, so it was inevitable that they would be curious. Regarding their curiosity, Jiang Hai naturally talked about it. At the same time, he also invited them to come and play if they have time. In this regard, they just smiled. Sitting for more than 10 hours on a plane was not a good thing. As for the first-class cabin, they were not that extravagant. One must know that a first-class ticket was enough to buy a relatively poor car. 2 tickets, a round trip, would cost more than 200,000 yuan. Just thinking about it made their hearts ache. After Feng Yunshin's mother heard about the price 2 days ago, she complained about Feng Yunshin. Why did she come back when it was so expensive? It was too expensive. Just thinking about it made her feel a little nervous. It was more than 100,000 renminbi. Just as Jiang Hai and Feng Yunshin's parents were chatting, Qi Li couldn't stay at home. This was because her mother had been asking her if she had any children. This matter couldn't be rushed. So in order to escape her mother's interrogation, Feng Yunshin looked at her 2 sisters and came up with a plan. When she was in the capital, she naturally took a bath every day, but it was always at home. Now that she was back, she still wanted to go to the bathtub to take a bath. Of course, The bathtub she wanted to go to couldn't just be a small bathtub. She definitely wanted to go to a big bathtub. There were many big bathtubs in Bing City. Of course, there were all kinds of bathtubs such as bathing, massage, steaming, eating, playing, and of course, there were some special services that only men knew about. But the latter was only one of them. There were very few bathtubs that specialized in this nature. There were many women who went to such bathtubs. Chili naturally went to such bathtubs when she was young, so there was nothing to be shy about. But now that she was back, it was meaningless for her to go alone. It just so happened that she could go with her two sisters today. After talking to her mother, Chili left home with Chi-Jia and Chia. She drove her family's car and went to a big bathtub nearby. Although Chi-Jia and Chili didn't get along well, after all, they weren't young anymore. Half of the blood in their bodies was the same. So the atmosphere in the car was really good. After chatting and laughing, Chili had already driven to the bathtub nearby. On the third day of the new year, there were many people who came here to play. There were many people in the hall. Some came with friends, some came with family members, and some came with classmates. It seemed that there were a lot of people, but fortunately, this bathtub was big enough. It wasn't difficult to arrange these people. After Chi-Li queued for a while, it was their turn. After Chi-Li went to buy the tickets, they went into the female bathroom. After changing their clothes, the three slender figures naturally attracted the attention of many women. It had to be admitted that the current figures of these three girls were really explosive. It wasn't only men who couldn't stand it. Of course, the only man who had seen it was Jiang Hai. The women who had seen them were also envious, jealous, and hateful. But in the face of such gazes, the three of them seemed very calm. After changing their clothes, the three of them went to wash their hair first. Then, they went to sit in the main hot spring of the bathtub. Soaking in the hot spring was really comfortable. As soon as they sat down, the warm water filled their breasts. It was really good. Those who had not soaked in the hot spring before were strongly recommended to give it a try. After sitting down, Chi-Li and the others also slowly washed themselves. Let me tell you, this hot spring is actually not good. There is a natural hot spring in your brother-in-law's manor. It is more comfortable to bathe there. While getting water on her body, Chi-Li said to Chi-Jia and Chia. Hearing her words, Chi-Jia and Chia looked at each other and said nothing. They naturally knew that there was a natural hot spring in Jiang Hai's manor. They had bathed in it much more than Chi-Li, but they couldn't say it now. "En? What's wrong?" Maybe feeling that the atmosphere is not right, Chi-Li looked at Chi-Jia and Chia and asked with some doubts. "Oh, nothing, I'm just curious. Didn't they say that hot springs are only found in volcanoes? Why is there a hot spring in brother-in-law's house?" Hearing Chi-Li's words, Chi-Jia took the initiative to change the topic. "Who knows this? I'm not a geologist. When I have time, I will take you to play. Your brother-in-law's house is still very beautiful." Chi-Li spread out her hands. How would she know where Jiang Hai's hot spring came from? She only knew that it was very comfortable to bathe in it, and that was enough. "You don't know, Jiang Hai's house has a lot of fun. The beef I gave you is from Jiang Hai's house, and there is also seafood. His house is also next to the sea. It is very beautiful." Since she couldn't explain it, Chi-Li didn't explain and changed the topic to her two sisters excitedly. Listening to Chi-Li's words, Chi-Jia and Chia looked at each other. They had no other choice but to smile awkwardly. Listening to Chi-Li bragging about their common husband, they couldn't say anything. "Ahem, sister, don't brag about your husband. We know that brother-in-law is very good, but he is not our cup of tea." With a slightly embarrassed smile, Chi-Jia said to Chi-Li. Hearing that her sister, who had always been at odds with her, admitted that her husband was good, Chi-Li was very happy, and the smile on her face became brighter. "After all, he is my husband, your brother-in-law. By the way, do Xiaojia and Xiaoya have boyfriends? Do you have any ideas?" Looking at the appearance of her two sisters, Chi-Li asked with a smile, but after she finished speaking, Chi-Jia and Chia were stunned for a moment. My illness may relapse. I don't want to drag others down." After thinking for a while, Chia opened her mouth and said first. And, yes, Xiaoya's illness is not cured yet. I still have to take care of her. Hearing Chia's words, Jia also thought for a while and said, Oh, my poor sister, don't worry. Your illness will definitely be cured. Hearing the two say this, Li couldn't help but bite her lip. She forgot that her sister's condition is not very good. However, she is still quite confident. After all, she couldn't even be exposed to the sun in the past. Now that her illness has been cured, maybe she will be cured in the future. Hearing Li's words, the two couldn't help but laugh and muddle through it. Shall we eat here, or go out to eat? It's rare that all three of us sisters are here. Let's have fun today. Skipping this slightly heavy topic, Li asked her two sisters with a smile. Let's eat here. I don't know what to eat outside. Hearing that Li finally stopped talking about this topic, Jia and Chia also smiled. As long as these things are not mentioned, they are quite natural. After that, they didn't soak for too long. After soaking for about 10 minutes, they got up and went to take a bath. Then, they went to steam themselves. After eating and playing, they prepared to go back. However, when they were putting on their clothes, Li noticed one of Chia's anklets. She picked it up and looked at it. Then, she looked at it with a strange expression. Chapter 938. Cough, sister. What's wrong with you? Looking at the dazed Li holding her anklet, Chia's heart skipped a beat for no reason. Then she walked over with a little uneasiness and looked at Li and asked, Oh, nothing. When did you buy this anklet? It looks pretty good. Hearing Chia's words, Li smiled and said to her. Hearing Li's words, Chia was stunned. This anklet was given to her by Jiang Hai. Is there a problem? But now, even if she really felt that there was a problem, she had to bite the bullet and pretend that there was no problem. Oh, I bought it when Jia and I went to Europe a while ago. It seems to be in France. According to the place of origin of this thing in her memory, Luya whispered. Since she couldn't blame Jiang Hai, she could only blame Jia. When did you go to Europe? Why haven't I heard of it? Looking at Li's eyes flashed and asked. Ugh, this. Hearing Li's interrogation, Chia was a little flustered. After all, she was not good at lying. It was a summit in my laboratory. I just went for a few days. Anyway, Lilia has nothing to do, so I took her with me. Is there a problem? But fortunately, at this moment, Jia walked over while wiping her hair and said, Don't worry. Hearing Jia's words, Li nodded, then put the anklet in Chia's hand. Such a precious thing, you have to keep it well. If you lose it, it will be troublesome. Looking at Chia, Li said with a smile, then put the anklet in Chia's hand. Then she put on her clothes. As for Chia, she also breathed a sigh of relief at this time, then carefully looked at Jia, but Jia stopped her, indicating that she should not act rashly. Then she walked over and put on her clothes. Compared to when they came and took a shower just now, the atmosphere between the three sisters was a bit solemn when they went back. Li, who was originally in a state of showing off, didn't speak at this time. Jia and Chia also didn't say anything. The car soon arrived at the Qi family's villa. Jia and Chia immediately left. After the two of them entered the house, Li didn't go in, but directly drove back to Jiang Hai's villa. When she came back, the girls in the villa had just finished eating at this time and were tidying up. Delina, Marian, let me see your anklets. Seeing Li come back with a bad expression, everyone in the house temporarily closed their mouths and looked at her carefully. Oh. Hearing Li's order, Delina and Marian didn't know what happened, so they just took off the anklets and handed them to Li. Li took the two anklets and looked at them carefully, but the more she looked, the worse her expression became. Then she returned the anklets to Delina and Marian and returned to her room. At this time, Jiang Hai was almost done eating in Feng Yunshen's house. After all, because he doesn't drink, it was quite fast to eat. Not long after, Jiang Hai had almost finished eating. Seeing that it was a little late, Jiang Hai said goodbye and Feng Yunshen also sent him downstairs. How was my performance today? Looking at Feng Yunshen, Jiang Hai asked her with a smile. Quite good. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Feng Yunchen also said with a smile. Indeed, Zhang Hai's performance today was really good in her eyes, and she can see from the eyes of her parents that they are very satisfied with Zhang Hai. Then take advantage of this period of time to accompany them more. They don't have it easy. After a while, I should be leaving. I still have something to do with the CIA. Do you want to go back to Winthrop or stay here? After eating today's meal, Zhang Hai's several tasks in his return to China were almost completed. There are only 3 months to go to Antarctica. He must go before February, and there is still some time to find the place in Antarctica. It must be known that in Antarctica, transportation is not so convenient. Therefore, it is inevitable to leave early. He is going to return to Winthrop after the 5th day of the lunar month. After that, he will meet with the CIA and go directly to Antarctica. I'll go with you. My parents are still quite healthy now, so I don't have to worry about them. If anything happens, I will take them over. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Feng Yunchen said with a smile. She did not tell Zhang Hai about her situation at home. Although Zhang Hai came over today, and she was not the only one who had to bear the pressure, she could not stay at home for too long. After all, she has been used to loneliness over the years. Now that she has Zhang Hai, she will not easily leave Zhang Hai behind. This is already her habit. Okay, then I will come and pick you up. Gently stroking Feng Yunchen's hair, Zhang Hai also said with a smile. Then, after the two said goodnight to each other, Zhang Hai got into the car, warmed up the car for a while, and drove away. Standing on the balcony of their house, watching Zhang Hai drive away, the expressions on Feng Yunchen's parents' faces were a little different. Feng Yunchen's mother was 70% surprised and 30% lonely. She was surprised because she also felt that Zhang Hai was not bad. Because they were junior high school classmates, she knew him well. Moreover, he was not too arrogant. He spoke and did things well. He was an average person, not outstanding, not too boring. He was indeed a good person, worthy of her daughter's lifelong commitment. 30% lonely because Zhang Hai was already married after all. People were greedy. Looking at Zhang Hai like this, she also thought that if her daughter had been with him earlier, would there have been a different result? On the other hand, Feng Yunchen's father was 3 parts gratified, 3 parts lonely, and 4 parts helpless. The gratification was the same as his wife's surprise. He felt that Zhang Hai was a good person. At least, he would not treat his daughter badly. 30% lonely was the same. He felt that his daughter's life was really not good. And 40% helpless was also because he was powerless about the relationship between his daughter and Zhang Hai. Although he was the head of the family in name, he knew that he could not control his daughter and Zhang Hai. This was really a little helpless. When Zhang Hai's car drove away, Feng Yunchen also came back. However, the smile on her face disappeared after entering the house. She walked indifferently to her room, and Feng Yunchen's father did not call her. Feng Yunchen's mother looked at her daughter and her old man. She could not help but sigh, and then walked into the room. Zhang Hai didn't know how Feng Yunchen and her mother chatted tonight, but when he drove back, his sixth sense told him that something was going to happen, probably because his heart had been throbbing a little. He drove all the way back and nothing happened. After parking the car, Zhang Hai also returned to his villa. However, as soon as he came in, Azalina and the others walked towards Zhang Hai. Their expressions were not quite right. What's wrong? Looking at their appearance, Zhang Hai asked cautiously. He really did not know what was going on. Li just came back. Looking at her expression, cough. Good luck. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Azalina whispered. Hearing what she said, Zhang Hai was even more confused. What the hell is this? It may be related to the anklet. That's all I know. Seeing Zhang Hai's expression, Azalina shrugged and said to him, then went to the living room and watched a TV series there. Looking at her appearance, Zhang Hai smacked his lips. If it's a blessing, it's not a curse. If it's a curse, it can't be avoided. Shaking his head, Zhang Hai stepped into his room on the 2nd floor. When he walked into the room, he saw that Li was sitting on the bed, looking at the sky outside with a dull face. Although it was dark, she looked motionless. Cough, what's wrong? Why don't you go down and watch TV? Walking behind Qili, Zhang Hai slowly hugged her from behind and asked her in a low voice. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Qili did not struggle or move. What's going on between you and my sister? However, although Qili did not move, she spoke directly. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai's body couldn't help but tremble.
He felt that Qili should know something.
Cough this. Hearing Qili's words, Zhang Hai was at a loss. I know you won't lie. If you have something to say, just say it. Let me give you a hint. Chia's anklet is the same as Delina's and Marian's, and the words engraved on it are also the same. After JH is the abbreviation of their names. If I'm not wrong, JH should be the abbreviation of your name, Zhang Hai. Without looking at Zhang Hai, Qili slowly explained her inference. Listening to her words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but sigh helplessly. He could only say that Qili was indeed worthy of her reputation. She could find evidence with just a few clues. And this matter was really difficult to explain. Hey, this matter is just like a TV drama. It's really strange. Glancing at Qili, Zhang Hai helplessly let go of her and then sat behind her. His relationship with Qijie and Chia was really strange. Sure enough, it's you, bastard. Well, I'll give you a chance. Speak slowly. Hearing Zhang Hai admit it, Qili turned her head and punched Zhang Hai's arm. Then she sat there angrily, waiting for Zhang Hai's explanation. Seeing that she was at least willing to listen to his explanation, Zhang Hai also smiled bitterly. Then he looked at the sky outside and slowly spoke. I met Qijie and Chia very early. It should be nearly 3 years. At that time, they were still called Penny and Little Ya. Looking at the sky outside, Zhang Hai also sat there and recalled with Qili. Chapter 939. Hey, what are you doing? Zhang Hai, who was sleeping in a daze, felt something strange early in the morning. After opening his eyes in a daze, he found that Qili, who was supposed to be sleeping next to him, was doing something hard. Feeling Zhang Hai's gaze when he woke up, Qili stood up directly and then straddled Zhang Hai's body. With a low moan, some indescribable things also entered the most indescribable environment. Hey, it can't be. Didn't we fight for almost the whole night last night? Looking at Qili in front of him, Zhang Hai said with some helplessness. I don't care, you bad guy, pervert, hateful bastard, you even took in my 2 sisters. My status is getting more and more unstable. I want to do as much as possible before you leave. If I wasn't the first to give birth to a child, my status with you would be getting lower and lower. Listening to Zhang Hai's words, Qili moved while patting Zhang Hai's chest and said with a face full of anger. Hearing what she said, Zhang Hai couldn't help but stroke his forehead speechlessly. Last night, he and Qili talked about Qijie and Chia. Qili also knew some of Zhang Hai's secrets for the first time. Of course, he didn't tell her the secret of the Dragon Balls, but he told her the secret of him being able to cure diseases. At the beginning, he and Qijie met mainly because of Aphrodite and the others. After Qijie learned about Aphrodite and the other situation, she threatened Zhang Hai to help her treat her sisters. It wasn't Chia, but Zhang Hai didn't know the identity of Qijie and Chia at that time. Later, feelings grew over time, and the relationship between the 3 became a mess. After being counterattacked, Zhang Hai also recognized their existence, but when he went home for the New Year last year, he found out that these 2 were actually his sisters-in-law. Regarding Zhang Hai's words, Qili still believed it. She had to say that her 2 younger sisters were really willing to go all out. They knew that these were their sisters, yet they said that they would seduce them just like that? Because Zhang Hai didn't know about their existence, and it was also before she confessed, Qili really couldn't say anything. What? Leave Zhang Hai? If she wanted to leave, then she would have left long ago. Why would she wait until now? Now that Zhang Hai had made things clear, there was definitely anger and hatred, but there was also a trace of inexplicable self-blame. If she had thought things through earlier, then they might not have had anything to do with it. So, after explaining, Qili pushed Zhang Hai. She pushed Zhang Hai 3 times. It was needless to say how strong Jiang Hai's physical fitness was. He had already done it 3 times, and Qili didn't know how many times. In the end, she completed it with her consciousness, and then fell asleep. In the end, she didn't sleep for long before she woke up again. It seemed that her idea of giving birth to Jiang Hai's baby was becoming more and more firm. In the past, she could be considered to be at ease. If it came, she would come. If it didn't, she would wait. Now, she was a little impatient. In her world, the company was very important, and Jiang Hai was also very important. She didn't want to give up either of them, so naturally, she had to find a way to balance it. Just like in ancient times, a mother was valued by her son. This was the reality. Your body won't be able to stand it. Stroking Qi Li's slender waist, Jiang Hai said to her somewhat helplessly, I know my body. Even if it really can't stand it, don't you know how to cure diseases? When the time comes, you can cure me. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li also leaned down and said to Jiang Hai with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also sighed helplessly. Sometimes she was so stubborn. The stubborn Jiang Hai also had no way. The only way was, don't blame me for making you unable to get out of bed. Looking at Qi Li, Jiang Hai turned over and pressed her under his body again. I couldn't ask for more. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li also smiled and said with a serious face. Sometimes, the war started so inexplicably. During the whole day of the 4th day of the new year, Jiang Hai almost didn't go out of the house. He only came out for lunch at noon. After resting for about 2 hours, he was pulled into the room by Qi Li once such a woman made up her mind. It was really quite deceptive. At least, Jiang Hai felt that his 8 times physical fitness was somewhat unable to withstand it. A silent night. The life of the 5th day of the new year was almost the same. Early in the morning, Jiang Hai went to set off a string of firecrackers. This was the 5th day of the new year. The customs of the new year were different from place to place, and the customs were also different. In some places, the new year was not considered over until the 15th day. In fact, Jiang Hai also had such a saying when he was very young. After the 15th day, the new year was considered over. In some of the rural areas where they were, it was often on the 16th or 17th day of the new year that some vendors and the like would set up their stalls. However, the pace of life nowadays was so fast that there were very few people who didn't go to work on the 15th day of the new year. Basically, after the 5th day of the new year, which was the so-called 5th day of the new year, people would go to work on the 6th and 7th day of the new year. Jiang Hai was also like this in the past. Therefore, after setting off the firecrackers on the 5th day of the new year was considered over. Jiang Hai prepared to take a plane to the imperial capital tomorrow and then return to Winthrop the day after tomorrow. He would then call the CIA to confirm that his personnel were going to the South Pole. This matter had been delayed for so long. Jiang Hai had to go and take a look at it no matter what. After knowing that Jiang Hai would be leaving tomorrow, Qi Li did not pester Jiang Hai. Instead, she accompanied Jiang Hai to go shopping. They went to buy Bing City's local specialties: red sausages, dried sausages, barbecued pork, etc. Jiang Hai would buy these things every time he came back. This was also one of his hobbies. After all, Winthrop did not have such flavors. On the evening of the 5th, Feng Yunqian returned. Qi Jie and Qi Ye did not want Qi Li to know about their relationship with Jiang Hai. That was why they decided to leave later. But they did not know that Qi Li already knew about it. Ai Xiaoxi had also sent a letter. She would take the train to the imperial capital tomorrow and meet up with Jiang Hai and the rest. They would take the plane the day after tomorrow. As for Qi Li, she was going to stay at home for a while. She still had to go back and teach Qi Jie and Qi Ye a lesson. These two actually dared to seduce their brother-in-law behind her back. In her opinion, they should be punished. Time passed quickly. Of course, on the evening of the 5th day of the new year, Jiang Hai also belonged to Qi Li. No one had any objections to this. After all, it was very rare for Qi Li and Jiang Hai to meet. Of course, in the evening, Qi Li also gave Jiang Hai a day off and asked him to comfort Du Ning. This time, It was Du Ning who accompanied Qi Li the next morning. In addition to Qi Li, Du Ning, and Qi Jia and Xia who stayed at home, Zhang Hai took a group of girls to the airport in the minibus he rented. When they arrived at the airport, there was nothing much to say. They changed their boarding passes and took the VIP channel. Even if it was just Bing City flying to the imperial capital, Zhang Hai still took the first-class cabin. After arriving at the imperial capital, they found a good hotel to stay in. In the afternoon, Ai Xiaoxi came. This time, not only did she come alone, but she also brought the crab sauce made by her mother for Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai could only laugh at this. But this was also a good start, wasn't it? At least, the mothers of these girls seemed to like him very much. When Zhang Hai was preparing to return to Winthrop tomorrow, Qi Li also returned to her home. Of course, she came with a mission. Qi Jia and Qi Ye were directly tortured by her. They also knew that their plan had been exposed. While they secretly scolded Zhang Hai for not keeping his mouth shut, they could only sign a lot of humiliating contracts. Naturally, it was not a problem to cede territory and pay compensation. Originally, Qi Jia had always been dissatisfied with Qi Li because they were only half-blood related. But now, she had to succumb to Qi Li's abuse of power. At least before she got pregnant with Qi Li, she had no ability to resist Qi Li. In this regard, Qi was originally afraid of this big sister, and now, she was even more afraid. She could actually guess that they were related to Zhang Hai just because of an anklet. This big sister was really terrifying. However, although the three sisters made a big fuss, they did not alarm the old lady. For them, it was not that Zhang Hai could not be divided equally, but they were more restrained by their identities as sisters. Now that there was a leader, things were not so troublesome. Zhang Hai did not know how Qi Li would deal with her two sisters. He only knew that after sleeping in the capital, he got on a plane the next day and returned to the United States. As usual, he first went to New York, then returned to Winthrop. After more than 10 hours of flight, the plane also landed at the New York airport. As soon as Zhang Hai landed, the CIB called. They knew Zhang Hai's surveillance like the back of their hand. Zhang Hai did not care about this. If they wanted to monitor him, they could monitor him. He did not care about letting these people know where he went, because sometimes it was safer to let them know than not. Just like in the ancient Huaxia, the emperor often liked to give some ministers servants or beauties. Did you really think that those people were just servants and women? They also carried heavy responsibilities. And these ministers would be very happy to have such a person in their house, because this would let the emperor feel at ease and know that they had no intention of rebelling. Everyone had shortcomings, greed, lust, and desire for power. These shortcomings could be tolerated by those in power, but he had to know what these threats were for. Although Zhang Hai was not a minister, letting these people in the United States know what he was doing was also a reassuring move. Of course, they could only monitor him. If they dared to cross the line, then Zhang Hai was not to be trifled with. Chapter 940. Mr. Zhang, hello? Do you still remember me? The phone was picked up, and a familiar voice sounded from the other side of the phone. Last time, this person spoke in English, but this time, he spoke in Chinese, although there was a strong smell of plastic. Louis Quezada, if I remember correctly. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai said indifferently. Hearing that Zhang Hai still remembered him, Louis Quezada also smiled. Mr. Zhang, I learned Chinese especially for you.
How are you?
Are you having fun in Huaxia? After hearing Zhang Hai's words, Louis Quezada also smiled and said, but these guys really know how to be familiar with each other. They talk like old friends, but fortunately, Zhang Hai also knows that this guy is not a good person. It's okay, I don't know why Mr. Quezada is calling me this time. So, Zhang Hai answered him indifferently. Hearing that Zhang Hai did not fall for his trick, Louis Quezada did not feel embarrassed. As an employee like him, it is not the first time that he has been slapped in the face by his target. His skin is extremely thick. Hearing that Zhang Hai did not give him any face, he did not care and continued to ask Zhang Hai, well, we recently agreed to go to Antarctica. Do you still want to go? Of course, but I just came back today, so I haven't decided where to go yet. Hearing his words, Hai also said seriously. In March, after the flowers bloomed in the warm spring, Hai will start to get busy. Although Hai started to buy seaweed seeds and fish fry after he started selling fish last year, the quantity was not too large. In March, Hai will buy the largest quantity of fish. Unlike the average American, Americans didn't like to raise fish because it would increase the cost of doing so. Therefore, more than 70% of the American seafood is naturally raised and then caught by long-distance fishing boats. In their view, whether it is the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, it is their backyard. If they want to fish, they can fish. Over the years, fishing resources have gradually decreased, but they do not care. Instead, they continue to increase the number of fishing boats. But Hai is different. He comes from Huaxia, and Huaxia has been raising fish fry for a long time. It is almost the opposite of the United States. 70% of the fish in Huaxia is raised. There is no other way. There are too many people in Huaxia. So Hai also has the habit of raising fish. Only he knows how much he sold his fish last year. This year, Hai is going to raise some better fish. Originally, Hai's fish was not for ordinary people to eat. American redfish sells for $40 per kilogram, which is almost $20 per pound. This price is already more expensive than the retail salmon. The retail price of salmon raised in the United States is about $8.99 per pound. The wild ones are $14.99 per pound, and the skinned ones are $7.99 per pound. The small tuna is $13.99 per pound, and the live American redfish can only be sold for $8.99 per pound. Hai sells them for nearly 3 times the price, which is indeed a bit of a scam. So this year, in order to occupy more high-end markets, Hai and Edward Anderson have studied together. This year, they can raise white pomfret and small tuna. No matter how small the tuna is, it is still more valuable than cod and redfish. This is a matter of bloodline. Originally, tuna could not be farmed because there is no way to raise this kind of fish in net cages. It runs around all year round, but with the increase of Hai's spiritual energy, he has a way to make these fish live in his fish farm. They will not leave even in winter, just like the tuna he brought in. At present, the population of tuna in Hai's manor is quite considerable. Although Hai did not count carefully, Edward Anderson once counted. There are about 1,200 bluefin tuna in Hai's manor. Hai knew that there were not so many bluefin tuna in the beginning. After he expanded his fish farm, many of them swam over from Cape Cod. What Edward Anderson did not know was that many of these fish have already laid eggs. According to Hai's estimation, he will have at least 30,000 bluefin tuna next year. Of course, this is not the number of mature fish. Even if Hai's spiritual energy is very powerful, it can only increase the speed of growth. At most, it can only make these fish grow faster. It can't make them grow as fast as they used to in 20 years. However, it is estimated that when they grow to 20 years, it will take about 4 or 5 years. In addition, Hai's manor had a lot of yellowfin, long-finned, big-eyed, and masu tunas. There were more than 10,000 yellowfin tunas, among which there were more than 3,000 adult tunas, and more than 30,000 longfin tunas, masu tunas, and big-eyed tunas. It was precisely because of these tunas that they didn't leave Hai's fishing grounds during winter. That's why Edward Anderson dared to propose to breed tuna. Otherwise, he would not dare to mention this. Hai's fish farm does not have a purse seine. If tuna are bred, these fish will run away, and they will have no place to catch them. Of course, at first, they will only breed small tuna. They are not prepared to breed bluefin, yellowfin, masu, big eye, long fin, etc. Instead, they will breed a small tuna first, that is bonito. In addition, Hai is also preparing to breed white pomfrets next year. White pomfrets are actually found in China, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Pacific Ocean. They are divided into freshwater white pomfrets and saltwater white pomfrets. Hai is raising saltwater white pomfrets. This kind of fish, whether domestically or abroad, is actually not cheap. In the United States, A frozen white pomfret sells for $13.99 US. According to Jiang Hai's black-hearted mentality, it is normal for this fish to sell for $50 per kilogram. As for Benito, he and Edward Anderson set the price at $80 per kilogram. Breeding more valuable fish and taking a more high-end route is Jiang Hai's intention. Since you are still planning to go, then in the next few days, you may have to think about it. Do you want to go with us, or do you want to go by yourself and we will meet at the border? Hearing Jiang Hai say that he will definitely go, Luis Quezada also said seriously, "Let me hear what you have in mind first." Hearing Luis Quezada's words, Jiang Hai also asked him, "We currently have two ways to go to the South Pole. One is Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, and the other is Cape Horn in Chile. Of course, if you want to take a boat directly from Mexico, you can also go there. It mainly depends on your schedule." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Luis Quezada also smiled and said. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai looked at Azalina. He is not too involved in these things. These things are mainly for Azalina to study. Tierra del Fuego. Seeing Jiang Hai looking at her, Azalina also nodded and said seriously. In fact, if they want to do their own research, they will also have to go through Tierra del Fuego, mainly because the political situation in Argentina is more stable and the relationship between Argentina and the United States is better. The South American countries have always been the backyard of the United States. In South America, Cuba was the only country that was not on good terms with the United States. This country was also a nationalistic country, similar to Soviet Russia and China. However, due to the division between Soviet Russia and China, some countries in South America started to have other ideas. Among them, Brazil's biggest importer was China, but they were more inclined towards the Western world. However, the Western world did not only refer to the United States. Other than that, there were some countries that were more or less ambiguous. They had made it clear that they were the underlings of the United States. There were only two countries in South America, Puerto Rico and Argentina. Compared to going to Chile, Tierra del Fuego in Argentina is naturally more worthy of Jiang Hai and the others with you. Visas. Tierra del Fuego. Hearing Azalina's words, Jiang Hai also said to Luis Quezada, "Okay, I will arrange a ship in Tierra del Fuego. If you need anything, you can find me at any time." Hearing that Jiang Hai has confirmed the route, Luis Quezada also smiled and hung up the phone. The next step is to study the itinerary. Since we have confirmed Tierra del Fuego, we also have to study how to get there and who will be going. After hanging up the phone, Jiang Hai looked at Azalina and asked her. He must go this time, but who will be going? This needs to be considered. This time, Chi Jia will definitely not go. After all, the U.S. military will be among the people who will go, and it is impossible for his home to be unguarded. Plus, there will be people to protect Zhengjin, so the number of people may be somewhat insufficient. This time, Rallis Carter will stay behind to protect Zhengjin. Beliak, Valentina, and Ailsara will be guarding the house. You, me, Wallace Shelley, Galena Vasilkaya, Belle Lester, and Knerson Peters will go together. Oh yes, Little Huang and Xiao Bai will also go. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Azalina explained the list they had prepared. Since Jiang Hai confirmed that he will go to Antarctica, Azalina and the others have been studying who will go and who will stay at home. Because there will be people from the CIB this time, they have to be careful, so the people who will go are all experts. In addition, this time they are going to Antarctica, unlike the last time when they were just going to find a cave, so they need someone to carry their things, luggage, and logistics. They can't rely on the CIB people. Therefore, Knerson Peters, Jiang Hai's bodyguard in name, also played a role. As for Belle Lester, it is inevitable that there will be a sniper in this team. Listening to Azalina's arrangement, Jiang Hai also nodded. Everyone has their own specialties. Jiang Hai does not understand these things very well, so he will let someone who does. Chapter 941. Boss, you're back. After leaving New York's airport, Jiang Hai came to the parking lot. At this time, Edward Anderson and Robbins Garcia were waiting there. They naturally came to pick up Jiang Hai and the others. Because Zhang Hai and the others came back with more people, they specially rented a minibus. Zhang Hai was also thinking about whether to buy a luxury bus in the manor in the future. After all, there were more and more people in his manor. Thank you for your hard work. Did anything happen recently? Zhang Hai came over and patted the two on the shoulder and asked them with a smile. It's only been a few days. What can happen? Haha, we are all veterans. We are very familiar with these things. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia and Edward Anderson also laughed and said, We'll talk about it when we get back. I may not stay long this time, and will leave again. This time, I will be gone for almost a month. Hearing their words, Zhang Hai said as he walked to the car. Hearing that Zhang Hai was going to leave, although they didn't know what Zhang Hai was going to do, they still had to report. The car slowly moved in the direction of Zhang Hai's manor in Winthrop. Zhang Hai was also in the car, listening to Robbins Garcia and Edward Anderson's introduction. In fact, at the beginning of January, Zhang Hai left the manor and went to Washington for a meeting. So, basically, after the Christmas holiday, Zhang Hai's men began to work on their own. Because it was still in a world of ice and snow, Zhang Hai's manor could do very little. At the vineyard, all they had to do was to clear the snow. The same went for the vegetable fields. The work of the cows was the same every day. They had to be let out for a run every day. Even in winter, the cows couldn't have too much fat on their bodies. Of course, they couldn't have too much muscle either. That wouldn't work either. Everyone knew that good beef had to have marbling patterns, and the so-called pattern was the fat. The other places were the lean meat of the beef, which represented the muscle. Therefore, when raising cattle, especially good cattle, completely lean meat was not enough, and it was also not enough to let the cattle have fatty meat. It must have a certain proportion of fatty meat, and then let the lean meat wrap around the fatty meat. Only then could the beef be sold at a high price. Of course, there were some places such as tendons and sirloin where there was only lean meat and fat, and there was no way. It was like training the brain into muscle. It was unscientific and no one could do anything about it. Robbins Garcia and the others were considered old cowboys, so they were very good at this. With Zhang Hai's high annual salary, they naturally wouldn't waste their time. They would let the cattle out every day and let them run for a period of time. Because in winter, the cattle couldn't eat grass and exercise at the same time, so the exercise time must be controlled well. As for Edward Anderson, he still sailed out to fish. Zhang Hai and the others didn't use the car to transport the fresh fish they caught every day to Boston. Instead, Zhang Hai directly bought a spot at Boston's dock. Yes, spot, not rented. Zhang Hai was so rich and overbearing. Every evening, everyone would go out to sea. After a night of fishing, the next morning, the fish would be delivered to the dock. Naturally, there would be people from PRA Walton, as well as the purchasing staff from the high-end Western restaurant that Zhang Hai had signed a contract with. They would purchase the fish according to the amount they had originally signed. It had to be admitted that in the beginning, when Zhang Hai's fish were caught, although many people saw it, not many bought it. But now, just like beef, it was completely in short supply. Almost all high-end Western restaurants required Zhang Hai's seafood. Now, high-end Western restaurants in Boston, New York, and other northeastern corners would have a special menu, just like the one Zhang Hai ate in Washington. The seafood from the mysterious Sea of Winthrop was nothing to say. It tasted good. It was so easy to completely crush with strength. Just like in the farming novels that Zhang Hai read before, a cabbage was delicious. No matter how much it was sold, people would buy it. Of course, Zhang Hai wasn't that magical. But his seafood was delicious. No matter what kind of seafood it was, the meat was quite chewy, which meant that there was enough exercise. Generally, the meat of farmed fish was very loose, but Zhang Hai's fish was the same as wild fish. Moreover, it had the special sweetness of sea fish, and this sweetness was particularly strong. The taste was quite good. There were also some busybodies who suspected that Zhang Hai's fish tasted so good because of something added in it. After the results came out, these people were dumbfounded. Not only did Zhang Hai's fish have no problems, but the content of elements that were beneficial to the human body was also far more than other sea fish. Of course, in the eyes of some people, Even if there was no problem, it was still a problem, but more people could accept it. People can't make everyone like them. Zhang Hai was also such a person. Therefore, he never tried to please anyone. No matter what people said, he would still sell it. If you have the guts, then don't buy it. That's how he did it. Of course, in addition to the fish and beef, Zhang Hai's sheep, pigs, and the like settled down in Zhang Hai's manner with these animals. Whether it was eating or drinking, these creatures had undergone some changes due to the abundance of spiritual energy. At least in terms of meat quality, it was much better than when they first arrived. Zhang Hai's German donkey, Nanjing yellow chicken, Jiangxiang pig, Yujimkin sheep, etc. The current taste can be said to be quite overbearing. Not to mention in the United States, even in China, you can't eat such delicious food. Zhang Hai was most willing to eat donkey meat. After sauce, it was sliced and eaten. The taste was really good. Mutton was basically eaten in the pot. Chicken and pigs were not important. There were many things that could be cooked. Boss, do you still remember the fry you brought from Huaxia? After briefly introducing the situation in the manner and confirming that there were no problems, Edward Anderson suddenly changed the topic and asked Zhang Hai. Of course I remember. Hearing Edward Anderson's words, Zhang Hai's eyebrows couldn't help but twitch. He remembered that there were two kinds of fish that he brought back from the country, the long-jawed fish, which was the so-called Yangtze River swordfish, and the large yellow croaker, which was the so-called large yellow flower. Although the introduced fish were all farmed, Zhang Hai believed that it wouldn't be a problem to sell them as wild fish. Moreover, these things Zhang Hai didn't sell them wholesale. He directly picked them up, frozen them, or chilled them, and directly transported them to his restaurant in the imperial capital to be sold. The price, however much he wanted, was how much. It was that simple. There was also a kind of Chinese bahaba fish. There were only 8 of them in total. This was specially made to prevent inbreeding. But the number was still not many, and it was not time to catch them yet. Recently, of the 2 kinds of fish you raised, the small one has been swimming back to lay eggs. I remember that this kind of fish is a single spawning fish. I think it's almost time to start fishing. Hearing Zhang Hai say that he still remembers, Edward Anderson also said with a smile, "Oh, can we start fishing so soon?" Hearing his words, Zhang Hai's eyes couldn't help but light up, and he said with some surprise, "Single spawning means that this kind of fish can only lay eggs once in its life. Most migrations ended up like this. For example, the chum ha and the whitebait would grow up in the river when they were young. When they grew up, they would swim around in the sea before returning to the river to lay their eggs. After laying their eggs, they would die. The same is true for the long-jawed fish, the Yangtze River swordfish, which is why it is so difficult to raise. Although Zhang Hai has the nourishment of spiritual energy and can make these fish not die after laying eggs, there is no way to make them live for too long. It has been more than a year since Zhang Hai got 100,000 long-jawed fish, and it's almost time. If some fish have begun to migrate, then Zhang Hai also has to be prepared. About March or April every year, these fish will migrate in large numbers and lay eggs. Calculating the time, it should be about time. After these fish have finished laying eggs, Zhang Hai has to catch these fish as soon as possible, then ice or quick freeze them and transport them to China. This is a race against time. Zhang Hai has been waiting for this for a long time. As for the new generation, there was no need to worry. With the nourishment of the spiritual energy and the protection of Zhang Hai's freshwater river, these small fishes could grow quickly. A single long-jawed centipede could produce 30,000 eggs. According to Zhang Hai's conservative estimate, with the spiritual energy and his own intentional range, out of 100,000 long-jawed centipedes, at least 10,000, and at most 30,000 would be able to produce eggs. If one centipede produced 30,000 eggs, then only 1/3 would be able to mature. That was to say, Zhang Hai would have at least 100 million long-jawed centipedes by next year. Considering the price of the fish in China, it isn't excessive for Zhang Hai to sell it for $800 per catty, is it? In a restaurant, it isn't excessive for $1,000 per catty, is it? Let's take Zhang Hai's 3 tails as an example. How much is 100 million? 24 billion. And it's still US dollars. Of course, it can't be calculated like this. The reason why this thing is valuable is because it is valuable in small quantities. Shanghai entering the domestic market in such a large quantity will definitely have an impact. Naturally, Shanghai is also included in this calculation. Even if it is sold at half the price, it is still $12 billion. No matter how much it was discounted, it would still be $6 billion or $3 billion. What is really valuable? This is it. $100 per caddy, equivalent to about 600 yuan, is still worth $3 billion. Of course, that is for next year or even the year after. For now, even if Shanghai can get 80,000 of the 100,000 long-jawed fish, it is guaranteed to be 24,000 caddies, which is nearly $20 million. Shanghai is a little poor recently, so he won't be soft-hearted about this money. Everything will be done after I come back from Antarctica. Thinking of the wealth that will come, Shanghai narrowed his eyes. Chapter 942. After returning to Winthrop, Shanghai didn't stay at home for long as it was still covered in ice and snow. To be exact, he was in a rush. So, when he returned to Winthrop, he had a small meeting at home. He made some arrangements for the operation of the manor when he was not around for a while. After everything was settled, Shanghai found Belle Lester and Knurson Peters and told them that he wanted them to accompany him. Naturally, there was no problem with the two of them. Knurson Peters could leave at any time, but Belle Lester, Shanghai gave him a 3-day leave. He would leave after his leave was over. At the same time, Shanghai and the rest had to prepare the equipment for the trip to Antarctica. Yes, Shanghai had to prepare the equipment himself. You could not expect the CIA to prepare the equipment for Shanghai. The first thing they needed was something to keep them warm. Although Shanghai was born in Bing City and now lived in Winthrop, anyone who had been to Antarctica would know that it was not on the same level. Not to mention Antarctica, even the North Pole could not withstand it. As the coldest place in the world, the southern district was divided into two areas, the coastal area and the inland area. During the warm season in the coastal area, the average temperature was around 0 degrees Celsius to minus 20 degrees Celsius. The average temperature in the inland area was minus 35 degrees Celsius to minus 20 degrees Celsius. That is to say, it was minus 20 degrees Celsius during the day and minus 35 degrees Celsius at night. In fact, it was still acceptable. That was why they could go there during the warm season. During the cold season, the coastal area was minus 30 degrees Celsius to minus 5 degrees Celsius, and the inland area was minus 70 degrees Celsius to minus 40 degrees Celsius. This was the reason why even the most advanced technology in the world could not stay outdoors in Antarctica for a long time. Of course, there was another more important reason. In fact, the warm season in Antarctica lasted for 5 months. It started in November and ended in March of the following year. A total of 5 months. But why could they only go to Antarctica in January and February every year? It was because of the wind there. There were hurricanes in Antarctica all the time. There were 300 days of gale days, and there were only 2 months where the wind was not that strong. Of course, the gale days mentioned here were different from the gale days in the normal sense. In normal times, the so-called gale days were only force 5 or force 6 winds. But in the South Pole, there were no force 5 or force 6 winds at all. The smallest wind was force 8, which was nearly 20 meters per second. It was only during these 2 months that the wind was level 8. Apart from these 2 months, the wind was level 10 and above. At its strongest, it could even reach 100 meters per second. It was impossible to calculate what level the wind was at. When Shanghai was in school, the most powerful wind he knew was level 12. But in fact, above level 12, there were levels 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. The highest level of wind defined by humans was level 17, with a wind speed of more than 61.3 meters per second. Obviously, between 61 and 100, there was still a long way to go. Therefore, even if it was summer in Antarctica, Shanghai still had to take good measures to protect himself from the cold. Level 8 wind, coupled with a temperature of minus 30 degrees Celsius, Just thinking about it made him feel so excited. Secondly, there was the problem of weapons. Ordinary weapons were naturally useless in Antarctica. When the wind blew, snowflakes would float. If snow entered the gun, it would instantly freeze the things inside. It would be useless even if it was oiled. So, in Antarctica, it was necessary to use sealed guns made of special materials. Although the power would be much lower, at least it could be used. Of course, regular weapons were still prepared. After all, some places were not so cold. Thirdly, there were problems related to orientation. There were no landmarks in Antarctica, and compasses were not very useful. Just satellite positioning and so on. You had to pray that the satellite was watching you. So, identifying directions in Antarctica was also very important. Of course, there were many other things, but at present, these were the most important. Jiang Hai had to solve these things while Belle was resting. Azalina was responsible for getting the guns. Wallace Shelley was responsible for orientation, and Jiang Hai had to buy clothes and so on. Keeping warm is extremely important in Antarctica. Fortunately, there is nothing in this world that can't be done with money, especially when it comes to clothes. Jiang Hai easily bought the world's best winter clothes through the American Express Company. This winter clothes was jointly developed by Huaxia and Soviet Russia. Jiang Hai did not know what high-tech material was used, but it could release the sweat inside and keep the inside dry. At the same time, the wind and cold from outside could not enter at all. Huaxia and Soviet Russia's Antarctic scientific research stations used it. In addition to thin clothes made in the United States and a sweater inside, it was enough to withstand the Antarctic weather. People like Jiang Hai, who lived in the north, knew very well. In cold weather, it was useless to wear too many layers because too many layers were too thick. In fact, it was not warm because your body heat could not be transmitted to that distance. Therefore, people often wore extra layers, but it was still very cold because the outer layer of clothes could not keep you warm. You should wear warm clothes inside and then wear a down jacket or mink fur outside. That would be quite warm. Therefore, Jiang Hai only bought such clothes. He bought a total of 8 sets. Himself, Azalina, Wallace Shelley, Galina Vasilkaya, Belle Lester, and Connors Peterson. A total of 6 people, 1 set each. There were also 2 spare sets, 1 for men and 1 for women. He also bought special vests for Goldie and Xiao Bai. These 2 dogs would also play an important role in the future. After his clothes were delivered, he chartered a plane and prepared to fly directly to the capital of Argentina, Buenos Aires. Therefore, although Jiang Hai was responsible for a lot of things, in fact, he was the fastest to finish the battle. In 2 days, Jiang Hai was already done. On the morning of the 3rd day, Wallace Shelley walked out of the room with some positioning equipment. This was considered to have solved the 3rd problem. At night, Azalina came back with a box of weapons. These weapons were all made of rubber. Of course, they could be made of other things, but Jiang Hai did not recognize them. However, they felt very rubbery to the touch. Jiang Hai tested them. The power of the weapons was only about half of the original. The pistols could only shoot 30 meters away, and the rifles had an effective range of less than 100 meters. However, this was not easy. Belle had his own sniper rifle. He had said this before he left, so Jiang Hai did not have to worry about it. Azalina was also happy to do so. Otherwise, where could she find a sniper rifle made of such special materials? That would be a little too much for him to do. Looking at the equipment, Jiang Hai took a pistol, a rifle, and his own Desert Eagle. He thought for a while and took out the composite bow he had bought a long time ago when he went into the mountains. This thing might be useful in the future. After everything was settled, Jiang Hai also told the current leaders of the family, namely Feng Yunshen and Ai Xiaoxi, to pay attention to the wind and grass in the vicinity. He also told Biliak, Valentina, and Alarcera, the 3 people who stayed at home, to remember to protect them and run away if anything went wrong. After the manor was gone, he could still rebuild it. But if they were gone, Jiang Hai would feel heartache for a long time. After everyone had been warned, Jiang Hai on the 4th day, Belle Lester came back. He seemed to be a little weak. It seemed that he did not stay at home obediently for the past 3 days. However, it did not matter. Jiang Hai did not care about the shortcomings of his subordinates. Having no shortcomings was the most terrible thing. After the 6 of them were equipped, Sarah drove Jiang Hai's MVP to the airport in Boston. When they arrived at the airport, Jiang Hai and the others boarded the plane through a special passage. Although the plane did not belong to him, he was the one who booked it. However, he was the one who booked the plane, so there was nothing wrong with bringing the dog and weapons on the plane. As for Argentina, the CIB had already informed them. With a command from the command tower, the plane carrying Jiang Hai and the others also flew into the sky. At the same time, Sarah also followed Jiang Hai's request. After they took off, he called Luis Casado. The CIB had to pick him up in Argentina. After confirming, Sarah drove back to Jiang Hai's manor. At the same time, he also hung a "Do Not Disturb" sign at the door. These days, Jiang Hai was not in the manor. Everything in the manor had stopped operating. Except for selling beef and fish as usual, the manor did not accept any visitors. Those who came to visit at this time did not have good intentions. In fact, this was indeed the case. Less than half an hour after Jiang Hai's plane flew, many people already knew that Jiang Hai had gone to the South Pole. However, these people did not act rashly because Jiang Hai had not yet entered the South Pole. There was no signal. Now he was flying in the sky. Now he was only going to Argentina. If something happened to his house at this time, he could come back at any time. Valentina, who was stationed at the house, also found that there were many people around Jiang Hai's house. In just a short time, the number of people had almost doubled. These people included Americans, Europeans, blacks, and of course, Asians. They could also be sure that these Asians came from at least 3 countries: Russia, South Korea, and Japan. Chapter 943. So, this is Argentina. After getting off the plane and looking at the scenery outside, Jiang Hai let out a long sigh and smiled. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Azalina and the others also looked around. However, they were not only looking at the scenery but also looking for any threats. They were actually quite satisfied with the climate here. Argentina was located in the south of South America. The southern hemisphere was different from the northern hemisphere. The 4 seasons were exactly opposite. When it was autumn here, it was spring. When it was winter in the northern hemisphere, it was actually summer here. Although Argentina was quite south in terms of geographical location and latitude, the temperature here was quite good. Now, Jiang Hai and the others were in the capital of Argentina, Buenos Aires. The temperature outside was about 24 degrees, which was the most comfortable temperature for people to stay in. It was okay to wear a thick short-sleeved shirt, a thin coat, or a sweater. Looking at the Minister Este Pistolini International Airport in front of them, which was not much worse than New York's airport, well, this airport name was a good way to make up the number of words, but unfortunately, it was unlikely that Jiang Hai would say this airport name many times. After the plane landed, Jiang Hai and the others got off the plane first. Because there were dogs and guns this time, Jiang Hai and the others could not enter the airport through the covered bridge. They had to be led by someone, and these people had already arrived after they got off the plane. Mr. Jiang, it must have been a long journey. My name is Jittered Maud, and I belong to the Central Intelligence Agency of the CIA. I'm here to pick you up. Mr. Kazada has already prepared the hotel and dinner. After Jiang Hai and the others got off the plane, a small airport car drove over not far away. There was a young woman in the car. After the car stopped in front of Jiang Hai and the others, the young woman walked down and smiled at Jiang Hai. Oh, hello. I thought Kazada would be waiting for us here. Forget it. Let's go. While talking, Jiang Hai looked at the woman. This woman looked to be in her 20s. She should be Caucasian. She had well-defined facial features, dark brown hair, and a height of about 1.75 meters. She was wearing a woman's suit, and some indescribable parts were extraordinarily bulging. She was also wearing glasses on her face. What kind of glasses lady is she?
She is really selling.
It had to be admitted that American agents were also very violent, but unfortunately, Jiang Hai did not buy it. After hearing the woman's words, Zhang Hai and the others also took out their things. Looking at Zhang Hai's things and the two dogs, the woman named Jittered Maud naturally knew something. With a wave of her hand, two airport cars in the distance had already been driven over. After placing their things, Zhang Hai and the others also got in the car and went outside. Using a special passage, Zhang Hai and the others got out of Ethiopia. Well, let's not talk about the airport's name. Anyway, they got out of the airport. Outside the airport, there were already two cars waiting for a long time. One of them was a luxurious minibus, which was for Zhang Hai's dogs and subordinates. The other was a Lincoln limousine, which was for Zhang Hai. After putting their things away, Zhang Hai and Azalina got in the Lincoln limousine. As for the others, they sat in the minibus. After everyone was seated, Jittered Maud also said something into the headset, and the car slowly started. After leaving the airport, Jittered Maud also introduced the situation of Argentina to Zhang Hai. As everyone knew, in Argentina, samba and football were the two most important things. However, not many people knew that they were an agricultural country. In the world, Argentina's beef breeding might be second only to the United States and Huaxia, and even some countries in Europe were far behind. Because there was no rainforest like the Amazon in the region, the public security was slightly better than places like Brazil. The political system was a federal republic, which was somewhat similar to the United States. The full name of the United States was the United Kingdom of America, and each state was an independent entity. In Argentina, the situation was somewhat similar, but not completely the same as the United States. Argentina was a presidential federal republic made up of 23 provinces and the federal capital. It was the third largest economy in Latin America. The first was Brazil, the second was Mexico, and the third was Argentina. Buenos Aires also played a very important role in South America and Argentina. Unlike some big countries, the capital was not necessarily the largest or the best city. For example, in the United States, the best was New York, followed by Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. was not on the list. However, for a developing country like Argentina, the capital was definitely the best. Just like Huaxia in the 1980s, and even in the early 1990s, it was the best place in the whole Huaxia. After all, it was the capital of a country, and the face of a country must be done well to show the temperament of a big country. However, Huaxia had been developing very fast recently. Looking at the housing prices, one could see that although the capital was still the best city, now there was one more. Over there, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Hangzhou, and other cities also reflected each other. However, the current Argentina couldn't be compared to Huaxia. Only the capital was the most beautiful place in Argentina. There were more than 80,000 industries and enterprises in the city, and the total industrial output accounted for 2/3 of Argentina's national output. It could be said that, like South Korea, more than half of the more than 43 million people in Argentina relied on Buenos Aires for their livelihood. In fact, Buenos Aires was just a small city when it first became independent, but since the implementation of the Europeanization and modernization policies, a large number of Italian and Spanish immigrants have poured in here, which has played a very important role in the development of this place. While introducing the street scene to Zhang Hai, Jittered Modi explained to Zhang Hai, "There are a lot of Italians here? This used to be a Spanish colony, I know this, so it's not surprising that there are Spaniards here, but what the hell is Italy? Are they here to start a gray gang?" Hearing Jittered Maud's words, Zhang Hai asked with some doubts, then laughed. Indeed, Italy left a lot of symbols and business cards in this world. For example, Rome, the Vatican, the Mafia, the Soccer World Cup, the fashion capital of Milan, and their army was very useless. Ahem, this was also something that Zhang Hai thought of when he thought of Hitler. You guessed 1/3 of it right. After those people came, they did come to clean up the dark forces here, but in addition they also took a fancy to some of the prostitution business here. For example, the Boca district here is where these people gather. It is full of brothels and smokehouses, and more than 90% of them are opened by Italian Genoese. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Jittered Maud shrugged. Under the surface of any city, there were undercurrents surging. Especially in a country like Argentina, there were definitely a lot of people eyeing them. Some dark forces were not something that Argentina could deal with. In South America, the main situation was like this, which was a bit ironic. There were many special organizations, not just organizations, but also some countries behind them, so Argentina could not afford to offend them at all. These organizations did not leave their areas, which was a tacit understanding between the two sides. The CIA had a lot of influence in the United States, so in Argentina, which was close to the United States, it was naturally very important. Some patrolling police cars even took the initiative to make way for Jiang Hai and the others on the road. If you are not in a hurry to leave, you can have fun here for a few days. There are still many interesting places in Buenos Aires. The operas and ballets in the Teatro Colombo are very interesting. The San Martin advertisement commemorates the independence war here. There is also the obelisk, the 9th of July Street, which is currently the widest street in the world, with a width of 140 meters. It is also named in honor of Argentina's independence on July 9, 1810. There is also the Congress Building and the Congress Square. After introducing the places to pay attention to, Jittered Maud continued with the introduction of the city. There is also the Tango Street, the Plaza de Mayo, the Rose Palace. Buenos Aires is quite fun here. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't speak, she also didn't stop. She kept talking to Jiang Hai about the local customs and customs of the area, and Jiang Hai also kept listening. One introduced and the other listened. Not long after, the two cars arrived at a famous hotel in Buenos Aires. Jiang Hai could not tell what it was called because it was in Spanish. Spanish was similar to Portuguese, but it was different from English. Therefore, Jiang Hai really could not recognize it. He only knew that the hotel looked good. It was more than 30 stories high, and behind it was the La Plata River. In front of it was a green park, and the natural environment and transportation were quite good. After Jiang Hai and the others got out of the car with their things, Luis Casado, who had met Jiang Hai twice, came out of the lobby with a smile on his face. In the CIA, he was definitely a big shot with real power, but unfortunately, he was nothing in front of Jiang Hai. In the United States, the rich were the first class, and these officials did not dare to provoke the rich. There was an old saying in Huaxia, the poor do not fight with the rich, and the rich do not fight with the officials. But in the United States, the poor do not fight with the rich, and the officials do not fight with the rich. Wealth was the first standard to measure a person's social status, not how much power you had. Of course, when the officials were at their limits, the rich had to be humble. For example, the president, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense, the director of the tax bureau, and so on. Jiang Hai was also afraid, but a small figure with real power in the CIA did not dare to show off in front of Jiang Hai. Chapter 944. Mr. Jiang, you're finally here. Looking at Jiang Hai, Luis Casada said with a smile. He had to admit that these people were quite sincere. When he first met Jiang Hai, he could not speak Chinese. Now, he could already say hello to Jiang Hai in rough Mandarin, which really piqued Jiang Hai's interest. You know, our Huaxia's New Year is very important. After shaking hands with him, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Luis Casada also smiled and did not say anything. Instead, he walked directly into the hotel with Jiang Hai and booked a room first. Maybe it was because the information was sold for $10 million last time. This time, he did not ask Jiang Hai to take the money. Instead, he had already booked 2 suites. One was a presidential suite for Jiang Hai, and the other was an ordinary suite for Jiang Hai's subordinates. Of course, Jiang Hai's subordinates were only Knirson Peters and Belle Lester. After putting the things in the room, Aller Sarah and Wallace Shelley deliberately stayed in the room. Firstly, they wanted to remove the bugs and the like. Secondly, they wanted to keep an eye on these things. They didn't feel at ease leaving the room empty. If these CIB people did something to their weapons or clothes, it would be troublesome. Luis Casada did not care about this. He specially ordered food to be delivered to Jiang Hai's suite. Then, Jiang Hai took Belle Lester, Azalina, and Knirson Peters to the banquet hall that Luis Casada had already prepared. As for Goldie and Xiao Bai, they were also lying in Jiang Hai's room. Outside, They only ate what Jiang Hai fed them. Azalina's food was not good. Jiang Hai also specially brought them some dried beef. This was their ration. Regardless of the people in the room, Jiang Hai and the others went to the restaurant downstairs and sat down. Jiang Hai had 4 people on his side: Jiang Hai, Azalina, Belle, and Connor-san. On the CIB's side, there were 5 people. As Louis Quezada said, they would bring a 5-person team this time. In addition to him, Jittered Mode, whom Jiang Hai met today, was also one of them. According to Louis Quezada's introduction, this person was from the CIB in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She was a local tyrant in this area. This time, they were going to the South Pole, so naturally, she would follow them. In addition to her, there were 3 other men. However, these 3 men were obviously combat personnel, not special agents. This was because they all looked very tough. Of course, special agents did not have to look like 007. In fact, they could not be special agents if they looked like that. Special agents were also divided into headquarters special agents, technical special agents, field special agents, and so on. Most of the agents on duty looked quite ordinary. Just like Louis Quezada, people would subconsciously ignore his appearance. If it weren't for Jiang Hai's photographic memory, he wouldn't have been able to remember what Louis Quezada looked like. As for Jittered Mode, because she was in the public relations department, it did not matter if she looked beautiful. As for these 3 people, they were purely assassins. Their main role was to fight. They were basically selected from Special Forces or the Delta Force. Their combat effectiveness was quite strong. According to Louis Quezada, among the 3 of them, one of them was a bearded man named Habakkuk Hall, who was mainly responsible for the ambush. Another one was named Keys Leslie, who was a sniper like Bell, and the last one was named Isaac Williams, a commando. Thus, a small team of the enemy was formed. Louis Quezada was the commander, but he was also a jack of all trades. He filled the other positions. As for the remaining 4 people, some were responsible for attacking, some were responsible for scouting, and some were responsible for sniping. Needless to say, Jittered Mode was responsible for intelligence and positioning. It was the same as Jiang Hai's team, which was China's Le Shelley. After everyone introduced themselves, they sat down in a clear and distinct manner. Not long after, the dishes he ordered were all brought to the table. Argentina was a famous beef producer in the world, so the dishes here were basically all meat. Of course, the beef here was also very cheap. Therefore, the people in Argentina were different from the people in Brazil. Although the GDP in Brazil was high, it was easy to be chaotic. Therefore, if one went to the streets to look, most people were thin. On the other hand, the people in Argentina were very fat. Compared to Maradona, one would know what the people here looked like. Meat burritos, beef tenderloin ribs, South American barbecue. There were more than a dozen dishes, all of which were basically meat. There was only one vegetarian dish, a vegetable salad, and that was all. However, for Jiang Hai, being able to eat meat was a very happy thing. Therefore, when the dishes were served, he did not stand on ceremony. He directly sat there and began to eat with a knife in his left hand and a fork in his right hand. Looking at Jiang Hai eating, Quezada and the others did not care. They just continued eating. No one there dared to stop Jiang Hai. It was not popular for foreigners to talk about things while eating, so Jiang Hai ate very happily and no one interrupted him. When he was almost done eating, he drank a glass of fruit wine to accompany the meal. He also felt very good. "Mr. Jiang, you've eaten dinner. Do you want to go out for a walk?" Seeing Jiang Hai place his knife and fork horizontally on his plate, Louis Quezada smiled and asked him, "Where do you want to go?" After placing the knife and fork, Jiang Hai also looked at him with some doubts. There was a reason why he placed the knife and fork in this way. In fact, Western food was very particular about placing the knife and fork. The knife and fork were placed in the middle of the plate, but they were like the character, not touching each other. This meant that one was tired from eating and wanted to take a break. If the knife and fork were placed in the middle of the plate in the shape of a cross, this was basically what the person who ordered the set would do. This meant that they had already ordered and were waiting for the next dish. If the knife and fork were placed in the middle of the plate in the shape of a pair of chopsticks, it meant that they had finished eating and could be cleaned up. If the knife and fork were placed in the shape of a triangle, it meant that they had received a good review. If the knife and fork were placed together in the shape of a triangle, it meant that they had received a bad review. Basically, no waiter would come over to ask for a tip because they were not happy eating. When Jiang Hai first came, he did not understand, but now he basically understood. Tonight's dishes were all meat, and Jiang Hai liked it very much. He belonged to the type of person who would feel uncomfortable if he did not eat meat for a meal. If there was a lot of meat for him to eat, then he would eat very happily, at least that was the case for now. I don't know how long Mr. Jiang will be staying here. It's up to you to decide when we'll leave. When he heard Jiang Hai's words, Louis Quezada smiled and said to Jiang Hai, "Indeed, they came here to accompany Jiang Hai to have fun." After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai said to Louis Quezada, "Then let's leave the day after tomorrow. Let's take a break." If he had nothing to do, it would not matter if he stayed here to have fun. However, now that he had something to do, Jiang Hai still missed it in his heart. If he really wanted to have fun, it would not matter if he stayed here for a few more days after he came back. He had to hurry up when he left. "Then I'll take you around here tomorrow. Tonight, we can go to the Boca district to have some fun." When he heard Jiang Hai say that they would leave the day after tomorrow, Louis Quezada also said with a smile. He had to admit that this guy was a qualified politician. He always had a smile on his face and gave Jiang Hai some advice. "Boca district? Didn't you say that we can't go there?" Hearing his words, Jiang Hai blinked and looked at Jittered Monde, who just told him not to go there. Why does everyone in the CIB speak differently? That place, is not suitable for women to go there, especially at night. It doesn't matter if we go there during the day, but at night, only we can go there. Louis Quezada looked at Jiang Hai with a look that all men understood, then said with a smile. Upon hearing his laughter, Jittered Monde couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. As expected, men were nothing good. As for the three CIB people over there, they showed a very satisfied smile. As for Bell Lester, he was also very curious. Only Knerson Peters did not do anything, because he might be a little slow in this regard. "Oh, I see, but I have some doubts. Don't we have to worry about the Italian gray hand there?" Jiang Hai gently knocked on the table. After listening to Louis Quezada's words, he also wanted to go there to have a look. However, he did not want to cause any trouble. After all, he was going to Antarctica the day after tomorrow. If he caused any trouble now, it would affect his plan. The gains would not make up for the losses, so he felt that it was better to ask clearly. "Gray hand? Hee, maybe Jittered, and the others are afraid of them. After all, they are just a branch. But with me and you here, it would be strange if those gray hands dared to jump around." Those Italian gray hands, to put it bluntly, were just some organized gray hands. Even if these people were given 100 guts, they would not dare to compete with the CIB, which represented the dignity of the United States. It was good enough that the CIB did not come to trouble these people. How dare they come to trouble them? As a person with real power, Louis Quezada was not to be trifled with. "Okay, then let's go and have a look." Since it was determined that there would be no danger, Jiang Hai also raised his eyebrows and said. Hearing Jiang Hai say that they could go, the others naturally did not care. After Azalina rolled her eyes at Jiang Hai, she went back to her room. That kind of place was not something she could go to. It would be quite boring for her to go there, and it would be easy to cause trouble. Therefore, he decided to let Jiang Hai and the others play. With Louis Quezada there shouldn't be any problems. Chapter 945. The Boca district, or Boca as it was known locally, was the old port and neighborhood of Buenos Aires. The most famous three places were Tango Street, Bar and Coffee Street, and Boca Juniors, an Argentinian football club established in 1905. Yes, most people who watched football matches knew about this team. It was a strong team in South America. After Jiang Hai and the others had eaten, they drove 2 MPVs to the district. As soon as they walked in, the first thing they saw were the colorful houses. To be honest, it was very difficult to see such colorful houses. If they came in the day, they would probably look even better. Louise Cazard also explained to Jiang Hai the reason why this place had become like this. In the beginning, this area was actually prepared for dock workers and sailors. Most of the workers came from Spain, Italy, and other countries. This could be seen from the European-style houses they built. In the beginning, in order to save money, the ship had to be painted. The paint couldn't be allowed to fall off and expose the metal inside. Otherwise, it would be corroded by the seawater. Therefore, no matter if the ship was used or not, it had to be painted every few months to make it usable. This was especially true in the early 20th century. However, things like paint had to be bought. It was impossible to buy all of it. Therefore, the dock workers and sailors would bring the leftover paint back home and paint it on their houses and streets. Gradually, the houses here became colorful. There were blue, pink, green, red, yellow, and even other colors. There were all kinds of colors. If it was daytime, the shops here would be open. In front of almost every shop, there would be Boca Juniors cards or postcards of football stars such as Messi and Maradona, or some football accessories. During the day, there would be many beautifully dressed dancers standing by the side of the street. They wore very simple clothes. These women on the street were not there to solicit customers, but to take photos and dance. For $20, you could touch their thighs and do something very gentleman. Then you could ask your partner to come over and take photos. Of course, there were some restricted areas and areas that were not allowed to be touched. Recently, the economic situation in Argentina was really bad. In 2012, $1 was equivalent to 4.40 Argentine pesos, but today it was equivalent to 15.50 Argentine pesos. Inflation and currency devaluation caused the economic situation in Argentina to deteriorate day by day. A large number of people lost their jobs, and the price of goods increased. Although Argentina was not in dire straits, it was still difficult to live. The gap between the rich and the poor was huge. The average income in Buenos Aires was 20,000 Argentine pesos, which was equivalent to about 9,000 renminbi per month. This was naturally enough for Jiang Hai to spend. In China, there were not many people who could earn 10,000 yuan a month. However, the prices here were expensive, and the population was huge. Developing countries should not expect education and medical care to be free. This was not the United States or Europe, and the pension income was not high. Also, there was no family planning in Argentina. As the territory was not small, every family in Argentina would have 3 to 4 children. Before these children grew up, the pressure of life was very high. But the security in Argentina had always been good. One of the reasons was because of the habits of the people here. Argentina was different from Brazil. After it was occupied by the colonists, life in Argentina had been very prosperous. A long time ago, Argentina had the habit of hiding its wealth from the people. 100 years ago, its economic strength was one of the top 3 countries in the world. The 4 seasons in Argentina were like spring, so crops like soybeans, cows, and sheep grew all year round. The land was fertile, and there were rich minerals. It was a very good place. After Argentina became independent, the Peronist government was willing to hide its wealth from the people. The taxes collected were very low, and it greatly reduced the conflicts in society at that time. More money was invested in the public. That was why Argentines had the habit of dancing when they were bored or playing football when they were bored. It could be said that the people in Argentina were rarely irritable. It was like Soviet Russia, where people would start a fight if there was a disagreement. There were not many people like that in Argentina, and it was a very lazy city. That was why even though the money had increased by 4 times in just 4 years, there was not much pressure from society. Everyone liked to make money happily. Similarly, like Brazil, Argentines had 2 extremes when it came to relationships between the sexes. One was the traditional type. In some traditional towns, if you got married and went out to find some professional women, these women would not do business with you. If you found a mistress or something like that, you would not be able to buy anything in the local area. This was a blatant disdain. However, in some untraditional places, some professions were especially developed. A few days ago, there was a very popular news. A father sold his 12-year-old daughter to a place with a special profession. In the end, the court ruled that the sale was valid because the guardians sold the daughter. This was the reality. In Brazil and Argentina, there were quite a lot of female special services. Not only were there all kinds of women, but more of them were underage. As long as you were willing to spend money, you could find women of any age. Secondly, transvestites and transsexuals were quite popular here. Therefore, if one wanted to play here, the most important thing was to have a good eye. It would be awkward if one found out that the other party also had a spear when they were about to get on the horse with a spear. Jiang Hai did not know if Luis Quezada and the others had such hobbies, but Jiang Hai did not have such hobbies. And Luis Quezada, who knew that Jiang Hai did not have one, would definitely not bring Jiang Hai to those places. As he introduced the place to Jiang Hai, the two cars drove into the bar and coffee street in the Boca district. After driving in, one would find that this street was somewhat similar to a street in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Women in revealing and seductive clothes with heavy makeup stood in 2 rows on the side of the street. There were all kinds of women. According to Luis Quezada, these women were the lowest grade. A quick shot would cost $10. If they wanted to spend the night, they would have to negotiate. But basically, it would not cost more than $50. Behind these women, there were some shop windows. Some women were standing or sitting there coquettishly. They were more beautiful than the people in front of them. These were the high-end goods. Basically, one shot would cost at least $50. There was a lot of activity on the street. There were hundreds of dollars and even thousands of dollars. As they listened to Luis Quezada's introduction, Belle Lester and the 3 CIB members kept looking outside. The 3 CIB members were mostly looking at the people standing on the side of the street. Occasionally, they would look at the people in the shop windows. After all, the civil servants in the United States did not have much money. Even if they spent their money here, they could not spend too much. Belle was looking at the shop windows. What a joke. Jiang Hai gave him more than $1 million a year. Other than giving some money to his parents, he did not have a wife or children. He had played in Winthrop and Boston for a few $100s. Now that he was here, how could he treat himself badly? After knowing that he was going to come here, he had deliberately withdrawn $5,000 from the ATM before leaving. He was going to have a good time tonight. Because the Argentinian peso had been depreciating, dollars were more popular than their original money here. We're here. Just as the 4 men were looking around, Jiang Hai and the others arrived in front of a rather retro giant building. These giant European-style buildings were also the products of Argentina's sudden wealth. In any case, it looked magnificent. At least on the surface, it gave people the impression that it was a high-end place. At this time, there were many people waiting in line in front of the building. Jiang Hai had been to nightclubs before, so he naturally knew that this was the rule of nightclubs. However, this had nothing to do with Jiang Hai and the others. After parking the car, Luis Quezada did not wait in line. He walked directly in with Jiang Hai and the others. The people at the door were either greeted or knew who Luis Quezada was, so they did not dare to stop him. In this way, Luis Quezada led Jiang Hai's group of 3, along with his 3 subordinates. A group of 7 people walked into the bar. Originally, Jiang Hai didn't like nightclubs because they were too noisy. But after coming in, Jiang Hai had some doubts. Although this nightclub didn't seem to be small, there was no sound at this time. Instead, there were sounds of cursing. Did something happen? Jiang Hai looked at Luis Quezada suspiciously. After seeing that he did not do anything, he slowly walked inside. Not long after, they walked into the hall. At this time, they saw that the layout of the hall was similar to that of an ordinary nightclub. There was a huge stage and then a straight stage, which was a T-shaped stage. The people were divided into 2 parts. In the eyes of these people in front of the stage, there is a huge TV. On it, there is a football game, and all the people here are not playing. They're just looking at the screen in front of them. No matter men or women, old or young, even the waiters here, even the strippers, all of them are holding a towel and shouting loudly. Seeing this fanatical scene, Jiang Hai can't help but curl his lips. Is this a nightclub for you to come here to watch the game?
Are you kidding me?
Chapter 946. Oh, It's the match between Boca Juniors and River Plate. No wonder so many people are watching it. Luis Quezada glanced at the screen and said with a smile, South America and Europe were really the world of football. People in each region liked different sports. For example, Xia people liked table tennis. This was also their national sport. Of course, other than table tennis, many people liked other sports. Basketball, football, and so on had a lot of roots in China. But when it came to the national sport, table tennis was the most popular. On the other hand, in the United States, the polarization was very serious. The more violent young people and black people liked football more. One had to admit that watching football made one's blood boil even more than watching a martial arts competition. Some business elites liked baseball more. Originally, these business elites controlled a lot of wealth in the United States. So, the number one sport in the United States was baseball, not rugby. But with the recent development in the United States, rugby was considered to be the leading sport. In terms of the influence of rugby in the United States, baseball, basketball, and ice hockey combined could barely be compared to rugby. In Europe and South America, it was naturally the world of football. The popularity of football in Europe was mainly due to the popularity of their league. Although there was also a basketball league in Europe, and it was gradually developing recently, football was their life when it came to sports. That was why they called football the number one sport in the world. South America did not have such a good league atmosphere. But football was the advancement that changed their lives. Everyone here knew that as long as they had the ability to play football, they could leave South America and go to Europe to get other nationalities and make a lot of money. Such a temptation was not small. Because in their eyes, this was their way out. They were not willing to be ordinary, so they had to make achievements. So, they would be like wolves. They would seize every opportunity and every training to achieve their inner goals. It was precisely because of this that football was really popular in South America. Almost any random uncle on the street could easily score 8 or 10 goals. If Jiang Hai didn't obtain the Dragon Balls, he estimated that he would only be able to score 3 or 4 goals. But looking at these people's craziness, Luis Quezada did not care. He was not interested in these things. So, they just went upstairs and sat in a booth. The waiter who led them up said a few words to them. Then he looked at the TV in the distance. Obviously, watching TV was more important than earning tips. However, Luis Quezada also knew that the people here were like this, so he did not care. He directly picked up the wine menu and ordered. Since they were here, they naturally had to drink. After ordering some foreign wine and 2 bottles of beer, he ordered some snacks. After the waiter on the other side, after remembering these things, he looked at Luis Quezada and signaled him with his eyes. Call Serena over. The rest of the money isn't for you to eat. Seeing the waiter's expression, Luis Quezada smiled and waved his hand. The waiter immediately left. Since he could call out this name, these people were indeed not people who could earn money by themselves. Not long after the waiter left, a big fat man came in from outside. This big fat man looked like a Jew. He did not look like a pure white person. Naturally, he was not black. If one were to talk about it, his skin color might be similar to Sanji's. He was not tall, only about 160 meters. He had a full beard, deep eyes, and a big belly. A big gold chain hung around his neck. 8 of his 10 fingers were wearing big gold rings. The big gold watch looked thicker than Jiang Hai's Patek Philippe, but no one knew what brand it was. As soon as the big fat man came in, he opened his mouth and laughed, revealing several of his big gold teeth. Looking at Luis Quezada in front of him, the big man said loudly, "Ha ha ha ha, Mr. Quezada is here to play. Welcome, welcome. Tonight's drinks are on me. Everyone, enjoy yourselves." However, it was a pity that Luis Quezada did not leave him hanging. He waved his hand and said generously, "There's no need for that. We are here to spend money. I called you here to let you pick a few good goods for us. You know what I mean." The head of the CIA's local power had come to Argentina, so he did not need to give anyone face. Ha 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 ha, I understand. You are here to spend money. Of course, I don't need to say that. If you have any requests, just tell me directly. I guarantee that you will be satisfied. When he heard that Luis Quezada had humiliated him so straightforwardly, he did not mind at all. It was obvious that this was not the first or second time he had humiliated Louis Quezada. This man is called Serena Ben Lodic. He is in charge of managing the professional women around here. He is the middleman between the government and the Italians. All the professional women have to pay him taxes. So if you come here to play, you should ask him to pick the goods. After hearing his words, Louis Quezada did not care. Instead, he went to Zhang Hai's side and introduced him to Zhang Hai. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai also looked at the man in front of him. This guy is really a bastard. This big brother seems to be today's distinguished guest. Do you have any requests? Seeing that Louis Quezada had to ask Zhang Hai first, Serena was not a fool. Naturally, he knew that Zhang Hai was a distinguished guest, so he smiled and asked Zhang Hai, "Well, let me introduce you first. This is my first time here." Hearing his words, Zhang Hai asked him, "It's mainly divided into 3 categories. The normal ones are women, you know that. Then there are transvestites and transsexuals. Animals are also fine. It depends on your preferences." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Serena smiled and said, Normal. But before he finished speaking, Zhang Hai waved his hand directly. What the hell are the last 3 categories? As for normal women, there are many of them. Tell me, I can find any kind of woman you want, from 60 years old to 12 years old. Wives, women, students, models, and even small celebrities. As long as you say the word, anything will do. When Serena heard Zhang Hai say that it was normal, he also laughed. It seems that Zhang Hai is not such a hardcore person. Beautiful ones will be fine. Don't be too old. After thinking for a while, Zhang Hai really did not know how to choose. He was just an ordinary person, and he could not ask for anything fancy. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, Louis Quezada smiled and gestured to Serena. Then he waved his hand, and Serena left with a smile. Mr. Zhang, since you're in Argentina, you naturally have to try out the specialties here. You should know that some of the services here are illegal in your country, or in our country. As he spoke, Louis Quezada winked at Zhang Hai. Seeing his gaze, Zhang Hai's heart seemed to throb a little. Could it be something strange, specialties? He said that he wanted to find a normal woman. Would that guy find him some transvestite or something?
It was so disgusting. He was not gay.
Even if a man looked like a woman, he was still a man, right? Fortunately, Serena did not make Zhang Hai wait for too long. Not long after, the waiter first served the wine, and then Serena came up with a group of women. When these people came up, Zhang Hai could not help but frown. Sure enough, although he did not find any transvestites or transvestites for Zhang Hai, he brought a group of little girls. These little girls were really young. They looked to be about 14 or 15 years old. They were not wearing mature clothes, but they were basically wearing jerseys from every team. Their hair was a little messy, but their faces were very clean. They stood there with a pair of big eyes, quietly looking at Zhang Hai and the others. There were not many vulgar movements on their bodies, and their eyes were very clear. Looking at these little girls, Zhang Hai was stunned. This is the specialties? Zhang Hai pointed at these little girls. To be honest, he could not accept it now. His tone was a little cold. Haha, sir, this is indeed a characteristic of Argentina. Oh no, the entire South America. You also know that the gap between the rich and the poor here is quite big. Big cities like Buenos Aires are still fine, but in some remote places, it is difficult for people to support themselves. Coupled with the existence of the Silver Triangle, many remote areas, especially the border with Peru and Brazil, people's lives are very poor. In our country, children are casually born. Basically, there are more than 3 children in a family, so you also understand. Serena was naturally very good at reading people's expressions. When he saw that Zhang Hai was a little dissatisfied, he came over and said to Zhang Hai with a smile. Louis Quezada also smiled and drank a mouthful of wine. This kind of thing is very common in South America. After girls start to lose their HP at the age of 12, some poor people will sell their children. Most of them are sold here, but some will also be sold to rich families. This way, they can earn a sum of money and at the same time, they will have one less mouth to feed at home. After they sell their children, they will have new clothes to wear, delicious food to eat, and even the money they earn can be used to supplement their family. It can be said that they are very happy to do this, and the government is also protecting them. They will not be easily beaten or scolded. Everything is done voluntarily. Looking at Zhang Hai, Louis Quezada smiled and said. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai did not know how to refute. This was really King unique. Chapter 947. Listening to Serena and Louis Quezada's words, Zhang Hai did not know what to say for a while. This was because he really did not know what to say. He was not a saint, nor was he a member of the Maternal, Child, and Child Protection Association. These people were willing to be beaten, and the local government was the one leading them. What ability did he have to control them? On the side of some highways there were often some little girls who would stop cars. They were there to provide special services. After getting into the car, they would drive while providing services. After the service, they would take the money and get out of the car. Then they would walk back by themselves. This was their job. Of course, there would also be accidents. For example, the driver would not pay, or they would be attacked by immortals. Some girls would even be killed. This incident had been reported by the international media hundreds of times, but it was still useless. These people would still exist because they were willing to do so. If they did not do so, they would starve to death or be beaten because they would not be able to contribute to their families. The government could not afford to adopt these people. They could only live at home, and if they lived at home, they had to contribute to their families. This was how South Americans thought. Therefore, over the years, many children would be sold into the city. However, the imagined forced sale rarely happened. These people were not forced to become prostitutes here. These people were all willing to leave the poor mountainous areas and come to the city. They did not need any skills to earn a lot of money. They could wear beautiful new clothes and even receive an education. They liked this kind of life very much. One had to admit that this kind of concept of price was completely opposite to Zhang Hai's. But think about it. Wasn't it the same in the ancient Huaxia? Wives, concubines, maids, and the like were naturally very particular. Rather than suffering in the poor, it was better to be sold to a rich family as a concubine. This was something that could not be happier. One had to admit that people's values were indeed not the same. Hearing Louis Quezada and Serena's words, Zhang Hai did not say anything. Since he was powerless to change things, he was too lazy to say anything. All of you, come and sit beside Mr. Zhang. Keep Mr. Zhang company. Seeing that Zhang Hai didn't say anything, Louis Quezada smiled and said to the two girls who looked a little older. Then the two girls ran over with a smile. Their bodies were full of youthful vigor. They sat on Zhang Hai's left and right side, sticking close to her. Seeing that Zhang Hai didn't object, the others also chose their favorite. Seeing that everyone was done choosing, Serena left as well. After he left, the atmosphere in the private room became more and more intense. Originally, Zhang Hai was drinking calmly, but the two girls didn't think so. Sir, your hands are so big. Sir, your muscles are so hard. He didn't know if the little girls were born like this, or if they were used to this kind of life. Sitting beside Zhang Hai, it didn't take long for them to move their hands up and down, taking the initiative to rub their undeveloped parts against Zhang Hai's arm. Their hands also touched Zhang Hai's body, and even when Zhang Hai wasn't paying attention, they sneakily attacked a certain part of his body, making Zhang Hai confused. Hey, how old are you now? Looking at the two girls beside him, Zhang Hai asked somewhat speechlessly. I am 15 years old this year. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the girl on the left introduced in slightly stiff English. I am also 15 years old this year. After the other girl organized her words, she also said to Zhang Hai. 15, the third day of the Lunar New Year. Hey, I can't do it. Don't you want to go to school? Don't you miss your parents? Hearing their words, Zhang Hai sighed, and then asked with some doubts. According to Huaxia's law, 15 years old is to go to prison. We're going to school now. In Buenos Aires, there are many girls like us. It's like this all over the country, and others can't do anything about it. The girl on the left may have better English. After Jiang Hai finished speaking, she smiled and said, "As for my parents, I am in Corinth. As for Dad and Mom, to be honest, I don't really want to. My home is in Corrientes, which is at the border with Baraki. In Baraki, the legal age for marriage is 14 years old. People my age in Baraki are basically already married, or even earlier. Fortunately, I'm in Argentina, but my family isn't very good either. I have a total of 4 brothers and sisters, including me, 5 people. 2 years ago, when my eldest sister was 13 years old, she received customers on the side of the highway and never came back. I don't want to become like my eldest sister, so when the brothel people came to our village to recruit people, I took the initiative to sign up. Now, life here is very happy for me." Looking at Jiang Hai, the girl on the left said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai sighed. The atmosphere in this country was like this. What else could he say? Perhaps in her family, the previous generation, the generation before that, and the generation before that had all been like this. Jiang Hai wanted to say something, but it was useless. Just as Jiang Hai was sighing, he suddenly felt a soft thing in his hand. Looking back, he found that the other girl with poor English had already wiped the jersey she was wearing and printed Jiang Hai's palm on her newly developed and indescribable thing. Feeling the softness in his hand, Jiang Hai was completely stunned. Looking at Jiang Hai's expression, the 2 girls laughed. For them, this was just their daily life. Here, they can learn, they can make money, and they don't have to be afraid of hunger or cold. The only thing they need to do is to use their bodies to please the men. For them, this was not difficult. Looking at Jiang Hai's stunned expression, the girl with good English smiled and said, "Boss, let's go over there to take a shower." Okay. Seeing that they were so proactive and did not look like they were being forced, Jiang Hai sighed. Since that was the case, he would not be the bad guy. He just heard that these girls would be paid according to the amount of service they performed. Among the money, there was a fixed 1,500 pesos, which was $10, which was to be given to Serena. As for the rest, how much they could earn would depend on their ability. In this line of work, it was impossible to take money for no reason. It had to be based on the amount of service they performed. This was because they were also afraid that the customers would complain about them after they left. If that happened, they would not be able to continue working here. Jiang Hai could only laugh at this. Following the 2 girls, Jiang Hai walked out of the private room and went directly to a nearby elevator. The elevator went to the 4th floor. After getting off the elevator, they brought Jiang Hai into a room that looked like a water bath. Jiang Hai was not an honest person in the past. Naturally, he had done this before. Especially after the popularity of All the Way West, many bathhouses in the country started doing this. After entering the room, the 2 girls took off their clothes. They threw their jerseys, pants, socks, and so on the shelf at the side. In fact, they usually didn't dress like this. They had a game today, right? Seeing that they had taken off their clothes, they turned around and helped Jiang Hai take off his clothes. After taking off Jiang Hai's shirt, the girl with poor English asked Jiang Hai, "Customer, can I lick you? You can do whatever you want. I think you are quite pitiful. Help me spend as much money as possible." Hearing the girl's words, Jiang Hai sighed. The only thing he could do was to let these girls earn more money. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the 2 girls' eyes could not help but light up. Then the girl kissed Jiang Hai's top. She did not know if Jiang Hai was allowed to write on it. The girl's green tongue was constantly moving. The feeling was indeed a little different. The other girls sped up the time to help Jiang Hai take off his clothes. Although Jiang Hai had always said that he could not bear to touch a girl, it was inevitable that a man would raise the flag after being teased. When the girl with better English saw the flagpole, she could not help but exclaim in surprise. "Oh my God, this is great." Hearing her exclamation, the girl who was originally licking Jiang Hai's 2 indescribable places also looked down and exclaimed. Then, she stopped licking the flag and knelt down together. Looking at the thing in front of them, the 2 girls licked their lips. The girl with better English directly lowered her head, while the other one helped to stimulate Jiang Hai's senses. Jiang Hai could be considered to be a veteran. After all, there were only so many women who had a fixed relationship with him. But the two girls in front of him gave him a different kind of stimulation. This time, Zhang Hai only lasted for about 20 minutes before it was over. It's really great. We can use it for a long time. Looking at the flagpole that was still standing after the end of the first contact battle, the two girls said with shining eyes. Hearing their words, Zhang Hai also smiled helplessly. Am I getting more and more perverted? But before he could reflect on himself, the two girls had already pulled him to the side of a large jacuzzi in the distance. The water that had been filled when they came in was already full at this time. After letting Zhang Hai lie in it, the two girls also lay in it, one on the left and one on the right. Chapter 948. Well, it's already this time. Looking at the watch on the bedside in a daze, Zhang Hai patted his head and sat up from the bed. Looking at the two naked girls, one on the left and one on the right, still curled up on the bed, Zhang Hai's big hand couldn't help but gently pat their buttocks. Last night, they really had a lot of fun. He had to admit that children had good stamina. It was said that children were like wolves in their 30s and tigers in their 40s. That was because children in their teens in China hadn't started learning yet. In their 20s, they would more or less be a little shy. In their 30s, they would no longer be shy, and their needs would skyrocket. These children here, on the other hand, didn't have any shyness. Although they weren't old enough to do these things, they were very curious. What kind of position, what kind of process they wanted to experience. In addition, Zhang Hai said that they didn't have to worry about her wallet, so last night they played very crazily. In the mouth, in the front, behind, and in the hands, they even hugged each other tightly. Zhang Hai took advantage of their indescribable outside body to come out once. It could be said that they had played all kinds of games. Even Zhang Hai's body had fallen asleep, let alone them. So, even though Zhang Hai was patting them now, they didn't show any signs of waking up. Shaking his head, Zhang Hai went to take a shower. After putting down enough dollars, he put on his clothes and left. When he left the room, the surroundings were already very quiet. He took the elevator to the first floor, only to find that it was already empty. Only a few workers were cleaning up there. Zhang Hai didn't care and went straight to the parking lot. When he arrived, he found that Connerson Peters had been waiting here for a long time. Connerson was indeed not that interested in women, but he wasn't a virgin who didn't know anything. So he also stayed here last night, but he woke up early. When he saw Zhang Hai come out, he also stood up and followed beside Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai saw that the others hadn't come out yet, so he wasn't in a hurry. He first went to a nearby shop to have breakfast. While he was eating, Belle Lester, Louis Cazada, and the others came out one by one. It was said that men had 4 irons. Originally, Zhang Hai thought that Louis Cazada was a very bad guy. Even if he deliberately learned Chinese for him, Zhang Hai was still very unhappy with him. However, at this time, his opinion of him had changed a little. After all, they had played together before, so they could be considered buddies. Therefore, Zhang Hai specially treated him to breakfast this morning. As for the wine last night, naturally, he paid for it. As for the money that they had to pay, naturally, they paid for it separately. This kind of thing was very particular. No matter how good a buddy was, they wouldn't treat each other like this. Of course, Zhang Hai didn't know who said it, but anyway, Zhang Hai believed it. As for why, Zhang Hai really didn't know. After the group of 6 had breakfast, they drove back to the hotel. After arriving at the hotel, Zhang Hai naturally didn't have anything to say. After all, Azalina and the others wouldn't trouble Zhang Hai because of this kind of thing. After resting in the hotel for a while, Zhang Hai and the others went out to play today. They took a good look around Buenos Aires. In the evening, they ate a good meal of beef and seafood in the recommended hotel. After that, they rested for the night. The next morning they were ready to go. Along with them, Luis Cazada and the others were also ready to go. The group rushed to the airport in the morning. This time, Zhang Hai's goal was the South Pole. Naturally, it was impossible for them to go directly from Buenos Aires. This time they were going to Tierra del Fuego. Tierra del Fuego was known as the closest land to the South Pole. It was located at the southernmost tip of South America, with an area of about 48,700 square kilometers. In the beginning, to be honest, this place wasn't very popular. After all, the environment here was very bad. Other than glaciers and swamps, there was almost no way to survive. However, since the global awareness was launched, many countries were interested in this place. After all, this was an outpost in the South Pole. In the 19th century, which was more than 1800 years ago, South America was liberated. Most of the countries in South America declared their independence during this period of more than 100 years. After the liberation, the major countries began to occupy their own territories. Although Tierra del Fuego had nothing and was not suitable for human habitation, Chile and Argentina still fought a few times. However, in the end, they felt that it was not worth it. Therefore, in 1881, the two countries drew their own borders here. The east belonged to Argentina, and the west belonged to Chile. Argentina occupied 2/3 of the area. And now, Chile was about to go crazy because of that decision. Because at first, there was nothing here. Other than the glacial lake, there was a swamp, and there was only a small grassland. It was even next to a forest. It was indeed not a good place. But now, the richness of the resources here made everyone speechless. It had been found that the reserves of iron ore were 65 billion tons, ranking second in the world. Although it was just an island, the richness of the resources here was shocking. How to describe it? In 1999, Huaxia found out that the iron reserves of the whole country totaled 45.8 billion tons. This small island was 20 billion tons more than the total iron production of Huaxia. Moreover, there were some places with smaller reserves that were not suitable for development. Only 21.2 billion tons could be developed. Compared to this island, the difference was more than 40 billion tons. It could be said that this island's iron output was equivalent to half of China's iron output, and that was not all. The reserves of uranium, aluminum, and manganese were the third largest in the world. There were 23 billion tons of coal reserves, 3.6 billion barrels of oil reserves, and 133 billion cubic meters of natural gas. There was no need to mention the hydroelectric resources. It was surrounded by the sea, and there were also forest resources and grassland resources. It could be said that this place was a perfect treasure trove, except for the cold. Of course, Zhang Hai did not feel anything about this place. To him, it was just a place to pass by. Argentina's Tierra del Fuego was equivalent to a province. Its capital, Ushuaia, was a small city with a population of only 30,000. It was officially opened in 1960. Every year at this time, which was the summer when the southern half of the environment was polluted, there were many tourists from all over the world. After all, everyone was quite interested in seeing the South Pole with their own eyes. Zhang Hai's goal this time was also here. After arriving here, they will take the icebreaker and go directly to the South Pole. Then they will land at the USA South Pole Detection Station and then go deep into the interior of the South Pole. After getting off the plane in Tierra del Fuego, Zhang Hai felt that the climate here was completely different from that in Buenos Aires. This was because it was hotter than in Buenos Aires. It could not be helped. It was summer in the South Pole. After getting off the plane, they entered a relatively good hotel in Ushuaia. After all, this was an outpost in the South Pole, and people who could afford to go to the South Pole were basically not short of money. Therefore, the price of the room here was very good, and naturally, the supporting facilities were also very good. Zhang Hai and the others stayed there for the night. No one came to trouble Zhang Hai and the others, and Zhang Hai and the others did not go out to play. They just spent the night very calmly. Early the next morning, Luis Quezada had already arranged for an icebreaker. He took Zhang Hai and the others onto the ship. The icebreaker was not small, but its facilities were certainly not comparable to those of luxury cruise ships. Fortunately, Luis Quezada was quite capable. The ship was similar, and the cabin of the entire ship was divided into 3 parts. One part was for the sailors and the captain of the ship. There was also a large compartment with 3 rooms, which was prepared for the CIB people. Another large compartment also had 3 rooms, which was prepared for Zhang Hai and the others. After boarding the ship, after all, Zhang Hai also has his own fishing grounds, so his people didn't feel any discomfort. However, people who often go to the sea know that after going out to sea, they can't see anything, so it's quite boring. Sitting on this ship was the same. Because it was summer now, there were no glaciers on the sea level, so naturally, there was nothing to see. Therefore, after staying here for a while, Zhang Hai and the others returned to the cabin. Naturally, after returning, they checked their weapons. When it was time for lunch, they went to eat. The distance from Tierra del Fuego to the South Pole was a total of 800 kilometers, and this ship was relatively fast. It could travel at 20 knots per hour, which was almost 37 kilometers per hour. In other words, if they maintain this speed, it would take them 22 hours to reach the South Pole. What's more, the closer the ship was to the South Pole, the slower it would be, because there would be some floating ice or shallow reefs on the seafloor. Therefore, according to Luis Quezada, it would take them more than a day to reach the South Pole. Zhang Hai and the others did not mind. After eating lunch and dinner on the ship, Zhang Hai and the others returned to their rooms to sleep. However, early the next morning, Zhang Hai felt a biting cold wind blowing on him. When he opened his eyes, he found that Azalina, Galena, and Wallace Shelley were curled up together in his arms. He touched the edge of the bed next to him. Originally, when they set off, he felt a little cool at most, but now his hands were frozen. Looks like we're almost there. He picked up the thermometer on the table. At this time, the air plague had plummeted to about 2 degrees Celsius. Although it was still above zero, it was still very cold. Seeing this, Zhang Hai woke the 3 women up first and asked them to put on their clothes to sleep. Then he went out to wake up Belle Lester and Connor Sun, as well as Little Huang and Xiao Bai in the other room. He also prepared coats for them in advance. Soon after everyone was fully armed, the sky outside also began to brighten. Chapter 949. 20 hours passed by quickly. After Zhang Hai and the others got up, they washed their faces, brushed their teeth, and ate some breakfast. When they went out again, they saw some broken ice floating on the sea surface in the distance from time to time. However, it was completely different from the winter in Antarctica. It was summer here, so there were not too many broken ice. Instead, there were some small islands in the distance with a lot of exposed soil and rocks. With Zhang Hai's eyesight, there were many seabirds, seals, and other creatures on those exposed islands. There were many penguins among them. It was also the time of year when penguins were reproducing. In addition to some black and white penguins, there were also many gray penguins. It was quite interesting to look at from afar. When we get ashore, you will know how annoying these guys are. Although the others did not have Zhang Hai's eyesight, they were also looking with binoculars. But when they saw Zhang Hai and the others' movements, the captain couldn't help but laugh and say. Although Zhang Hai and the others did not understand what he meant now, they knew from the captain's words that these penguins and seals were indeed not good people. As the ship got closer and closer to the Antarctic continent, Zhang Hai and the others also felt the Antarctic winter. They were now by the sea, so the temperature was not very cold. It was about 2 or 3 degrees below zero. But when the sea breeze blew, it was not ordinary cold. Fortunately, Zhang Hai and the others were used to the temperature in his fishing ground, but some of the CIB people could not stand it. The 3 team members were still fine. They were outside all day long, so they could still withstand the wind and sun. They wore thick combat uniforms, tactical vests, and other things and held guns. But the 2 guys, Luis Quezada and Jittered Maud, could not stand it. After looking outside for a while, they returned to the cabin. As for whether they went to get warm and how to get warm, Zhang Hai and the others did not know. Standing on the ship, they felt the biting cold north wind. Not long after, the outline of a scientific research station in the distance appeared in front of Zhang Hai and the others. Almost all the major countries in the world had scientific research stations in Antarctica. Most of them were from Soviet Russia. This was also the result of the Cold War. At that time, Soviet Russia had been competing with the United States for the position of the world's leader. Whatever the United States did, the United States would do. At that time, Soviet Russia was really strong. But unfortunately, Soviet Russia's heavy industry was extremely developed, but its light industry was really not good. It was almost non-existent. At that time, almost all the light industry came from Huaxia. In the far east of Soviet Russia, which was the Siberian region, people like Zhang Hai and the others had heard of it. Their parents' generation would often take the train to the border. There, they would trade the light industry products from Huaxia for gold or other valuable things. At that time, one of Fu Yuan's relatives was in this business. Once, after he had finished trading, he saw someone selling Caucasian puppies. This type of puppy was worth a few hundred RMB in China at that time, so he took a piece of clothing worth 50 RMB and exchanged it for 2 puppies. He sold one and gave the other to Fu Yuan's family. Zhang Hai and the others knew about this. It was because they only developed heavy industry and did not develop light industry. As the world gradually became peaceful, the main products produced by the heavy industry in Soviet Russia, such as weapons, could not be sold. After that, they were cheated by the United States, and Soviet Russia was finished. Then they disintegrated. But these things that were inherited from the previous era were still very useful. Currently, Soviet Russia had 8 scientific research stations in Antarctica, which was the most. The second was the United States with 5, followed by Huaxia with 4. Normally, people who came to Antarctica for vacation would first land on Half Moon Island. There was Argentina's Camara Scientific Research Station there. But Zhang Hai was not here for vacation, so they went straight to the American Scientific Research Station. The big ship slowly docked at the bridge outside the Scientific Research Station. Then, Zhang Hai and the others prepared to disembark. But just as they were about to disembark, the people on the ship were also preparing to disembark. "Are you going to wait for us here?" Zhang Hai looked at these people and asked with some doubts. Of course, the CIA officer paid for the round trip. "There are no fish now, so it's better for us to wait for you. Moreover, there are many entertainment programs here." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the captain laughed. Looking at his smile, Zhang Hai was a little confused. What entertainment could there be in this world of ice and snow? Zhang Hai shook his head. Since these people were not leaving, it would save him a lot of trouble. Carrying his things, Zhang Hai got off the ship and went to the center of the scientific research station. There were some exposed areas with a large group of penguins and seals. The seals were more or less clever. When they saw the ship coming from afar, most of the seals dove into the cold sea. Although they did not swim away, they watched the people on the ship from the sea. If these people had the intention to attack them, these guys would immediately dive into the sea and escape. The penguins were much more stupid. In fact, no one would catch a penguin. First, because there were really many of these animals. Second, because these things were really worthless. The skin of penguins was really not suitable to be made into clothes. Although they looked like this, the fur on their skin was really feathers. It might not be as useful as duck feathers or goose feathers. Also, who would go through so much trouble to come to Antarctica to kill these creatures? Next was the meat of this creature. Perhaps it was to keep out the cold, so it was all fat. If it was in ancient times, these moving pieces of fat might have been really popular with the common people, but who would eat them now? This was the reality. Therefore, there were 120 million of these creatures in Antarctica alone. They had nothing to do with being endangered or high risk. The seals in Antarctica could eat 15 penguins a day, so these things were really not a lot. After getting off the ship, Zhang Hai knew the first reason why penguins were so annoying, because these guys were too smelly. When they were on the ship, they were far away, and the wind was blowing from the south to the north. After all, it was summer, so Zhang Hai did not smell it. When he got off the ship, he felt like he had entered a chicken farm. Penguins were the same as most birds. They didn't have a fixed place to defecate. They could defecate wherever they wanted. Therefore, from afar one couldn't see clearly. Now that they were closer, they could see bird feces everywhere. The stench combined with the fishy smell of the sea almost made Zhang Hai vomit. Even his subordinates couldn't help it. Fortunately, these people were all experienced fighters. Whether it was Azalina or Belle, they were not weak. Knerson Peters used to fight in the underworld. He had endured human feces mixed with blood in the ring, let alone bird poop, so he did not do anything else. Among the CIA people, the three soldiers naturally did not care, but the woman, Jittered Maud, and Louis Cazada vomited on the spot when the wind blew. After they got used to it, they covered their noses and walked out of the area. They entered the scientific research station that belonged to the United States in the distance. As soon as they walked in, they saw a fat man holding a beer and looking at Jiang Hai and the others with a smile. Especially when he saw the four women who came with the team, his eyes could not help but light up. "Welcome, welcome. Come in, please." The guy smiled at Jiang Hai and the others and said with a smile, "This is Dr. Vistenkarl, the person in charge of this scientific research station." Seeing this guy being so enthusiastic, Louis Cazada, who had just calmed down, also took a deep breath, walked in front, and introduced Jiang Hai. "Hello, doctor." Hearing that he was the person in charge here, Jiang Hai frowned. His sixth sense told him that this guy was definitely up to no good, especially when he looked at the three women beside him just now. But because this was his territory, Jiang Hai still reached out and shook his hand. "This is Jiang Hai, Mr. Jiang. He's going to Antarctica to take a look. We will stay here for the night and leave early tomorrow morning." When Jiang Hai shook hands with him, Louis Cazada also introduced Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, the doctor also smiled. In fact, how could he know Jiang Hai? But that did not prevent him from saying something like, "I've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time." But his eyes kept glancing at Azalina and the others. Looking at him, Azalina and the others also frowned. This guy seems to be a little bit of a pervert. "Please come in, I'll introduce you to the situation here." Maybe he saw the disgust in Azalina's expression, but he did not care. He smiled and led Jiang Hai and the others in. Not long after, Jiang Hai and the others walked into the scientific research station. The scientific research station was divided into three major areas: the living area, the scientific research area, and the observation area. The so-called observation area was an open-air platform. Of course, there was a glass cover outside to block the wind. Here, one could observe and record the celestial phenomenon of Antarctica. There were many machines and the like in the scientific research area, which Jiang Hai could not understand. The living area was definitely one of the largest areas in the scientific research station. Everyone had their own independent living space. There was a huge warehouse, a bar area, a place for bathing, a kitchen, a dining room, and so on. However, Jiang Hai found that in this scientific research station, regardless of whether it was men or women, they were all looking at Jiang Hai and the others strangely. The men were looking at the women in Jiang Hai's team presumptuously, while the women were looking at Jiang Hai. Many women were about to drool at the sight of Coniston Peters, who was a big and tall man. Chapter 950. What does this mean? Jiang Hai looked at the eyes of these people in front of him. If it weren't for the fact that these people still looked like humans, he would have thought that he was in a Resident Evil world. Why do these people's eyes look so strange? "Oh, I'm not sure. I'll go and ask right away." Louis Cazada also felt that the atmosphere was a bit strange, so after thinking for a while, he said something to Jiang Hai. He then nodded to Jittered Maud behind him. After Jittered Maud saw Louis Cazada nodding, she immediately took out a smartphone. However, her phone was different from ordinary smartphones. The system of this phone was the internal system of the CIA. No one could hack it, not even Wallace Shelley. And it seemed that the technology behind it was also very strong. Basically, a mobile phone is a transparent piece of glass. It's very thin, and if it's not turned on, others can't see it. Of course, they can see it themselves. Jiang Hai has always been very interested in this kind of black technology, but for this kind of black technology, he feels that it's ordinary because he doesn't lack such black technology. Don't forget, he was a shareholder of Google, although the smart system in his house was not yet complete. But before he left, the two guys at Google also gave Jiang Hai a new bracelet that was connected to his glasses. When he wanted to make a call, he did not need to take out his phone anymore. He could directly look at it with his eyes. The bracelet would project the phone screen, and he could directly operate it on it. It could be projected into the air, on his arm, or on the table, etc. The technology seemed to be very powerful, so he was not envious of the transparent phone. After all, we don't have much hot water here. In the kitchen over there, dinner time is at 5:30 p.m. If you have any requests, remember to tell the chef in advance. The chef will try his best to satisfy your requests, but the amount is up to them. There's a public bath here, and there's a bar over there. As long as someone is there, you can buy beer. Beer is free, but foreign wine costs money. You can't enter the research room, but the observation deck doesn't matter. Any other questions? At this time, Veston Carl led Zhang Hai and the others to a row of rooms and said to Zhang Hai. After hearing that there were no more questions, Zhang Hai and the others also got the keys to their respective rooms. After opening the door, they also walked into their rooms. But when he saw that Azalina, Wallace Shelley, and Galina Vizcaya had all moved into Zhang Hai's room, he couldn't help but twitch his mouth, then sighed helplessly, turned around and left. It was obvious that he was not in a good mood now. What do you mean? Looking at the man who seemed to be unhappy walking away, Zhang Hai frowned and asked with some puzzlement. Ahem, we seem to have broken the rules here. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Guitard Maud's face inexplicably blushed. Then he showed the information in his hand to Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. Then his expression became a little strange. Because the information written on it seemed a bit ridiculous, to be honest, Zhang Hai himself found it quite difficult to accept what was written on the information. Because the geographical conditions in Antarctica were somewhat special, this place could only be entered for 3 months in a year, and there were still 9 months where it could not be entered. Therefore, supply ships and the like would transport enough materials for these people to live for 9 months during these 3 months. Then these people from the scientific research station would be left here for 9 months. During this time, they couldn't contact their families, so naturally there was no entertainment to speak of. Because the sunlight in Antarctica was very short during winter, electricity was also available. Everyone lived together all day. Without electricity, there was nothing to play with, and there was almost no way to go out. Under such circumstances, the Americans, or rather the Westerners, were originally very indulgent. Just like in the ancient Huaxia, everyone went to bed early, and there was no nightlife. Under such circumstances, there was nothing else to do except for not being able to write about it. Therefore, there was also an unwritten rule in the Antarctic Scientific Research Station, which was to make this place an independent existence from the rest of the world. Here, the way to vent was to find a partner, which was what the people here called an ice wife or an ice husband. Many of these people were married people, so they didn't care about this. Each person would use at least 120 condoms every year, not to mention when they didn't bring any. Therefore, the Antarctic Scientific Research Station would give these people an experience every year, the most important of which was to check for diseases such as AIDS. Although these scientific research stations tried to recruit people according to a 1-to-1 ratio, not many women were willing to come, so basically, the recruitment ratio was about 2-to-1. In this way, in the scientific research station, women were well-deserved queens. They had the right to choose their own partners, and the men were somewhat depressed. This time, when they saw that there were 4 beautiful women in Zhang Hai's group, the men were very excited. However, when they saw Azalina and the others living in Zhang Hai's room, they knew that they had no chance, so Dr. Carl sighed helplessly. It seems that this place is really messy. After reading the information, Zhang Hai then gave the phone to Jittered Maud and curled his lips. He knew that these guys were up to no good just now. Don't go out easily tonight. Don't cause any trouble. Tomorrow morning, we will leave after getting the supplies. Louis Cazada, who also read the information, also said at this time, then walked into his room. Jittered Maud thought for a while and followed in. Sure enough, the two of them were having an affair. As for Zhang Hai and the others, they also returned to their rooms. After resting in the room, Zhang Hai and the others went to the restaurant for dinner in the evening. When they were in the restaurant, naturally, many people paid attention to Zhang Hai and the others, but they were not stupid. Maybe they knew that they couldn't afford to offend these people, and they were all taken, so these people didn't come to trouble Zhang Hai and the others. They just watched from a distance. Of course, the most important reason was that these people had actually just arrived. It was summer now, so naturally, they could go back and forth through the supply ship, so they didn't need much now. After dinner, Zhang Hai and the others went back to rest. Early the next morning, Zhang Hai and the others left here. However, before they left, they naturally had to get the supplies. The CIA's work, especially with Zhang Hai's financial support, was very reliable. The scientific research station here had already prepared the things they needed. There were 6 huge snowmobiles, each of which could seat 4 people, but now only 2 people could ride each one because they still had to store supplies and so on. There were also a lot of supplies. There were windproof tents, special pots, alcohol blocks, medical kits, and things similar to heat packs. There were also military shovels, pickaxes, hammers, and so on. There were all kinds of tools, but most of them were food. In Antarctica, there was no shortage of water. The seawater couldn't freeze because only water vapor could freeze and turn into snow. So all the snow and ice in Antarctica was fresh water. This didn't matter. The main thing was food, such as special jerky, chocolate bars, compressed biscuits. Although these things tasted very bad in Antarctica, these were all life-saving things. The last and most important thing was fuel, gasoline. Zhang Hai's snowmobiles were a mixture of gasoline and electricity. There was a solar panel on the snowmobiles. During the day, they could use the electricity to run. If there was not enough electricity, or if it was a cloudy day for a long time, or if they had to travel at night, then they could use gasoline. Because gasoline was a mixed liquid, its freezing point, which was the so-called freezing point, was different. Generally speaking, the freezing point of gasoline in China was between -35 to 45 degrees Celsius. In some extremely cold places, it could also reach 50 to 60 degrees Celsius. However, at the Antarctic Scientific Research Station, it was -60 to -70 degrees Celsius all year round, or even colder. Therefore, the freezing point of gasoline here was -80 degrees Celsius, which was also the lowest temperature. -80 degrees Celsius was enough to deal with a lot of situations. Of course, if it reached -80 degrees Celsius or above, then there was no need to go out. Not everyone would seek death at that time. For Zhang Hai, he had spent money anyway, so Zhang Hai and the others didn't stand on ceremony. After packing more than a dozen bags of supplies and more than 20 barrels of gasoline, they left the scientific research station, avoiding the reluctant gazes of these guys. After going outside, Zhang Hai and the others were naturally fully armed. Even Zhang Hai and Xiao Bai were wearing their own custom-made clothes and 2 specially made anti-snow goggles. Sitting behind Zhang Hai's snowmobile, they looked quite impressive. Then, Zhang Hai and the others drove the 6 snowmobiles and sped towards the interior of Antarctica. Although Louis Quezada had never been to Antarctica personally, he knew the route and location very well, so he just needed to follow his navigation. Although the snowmobiles couldn't be compared to real motorcycles, they were still very fast here, almost reaching a speed of about 80 kilometers per hour. However, although they weren't slow, the snowmobiles were almost silent because there were snow mountains and glaciers everywhere in Antarctica. If they weren't careful, they could cause an avalanche. Chapter 951. Let's camp here tonight. There's a plane in front of us. It looks like we won't be able to get out today. The strong wind was mixed with snowflakes, constantly blowing on Zhang Hai and the others. Louis Quezada pointed at the electronic map in his hand while speaking to Zhang Hai next to him. Zhang Hai also glanced at the endless plain in the distance and nodded gently. Then the 2 of them separated and jumped down from the snow slope in front of them. They entered the 2 small camps behind them, one on the left and one on the right. This was where they lived. There were 2 tents on each side, one big and one small. They looked pretty good. It was said that one should not have the intention to harm others, but one must always be vigilant against others. Although they came together, Zhang Hai and Louis Quezada still moved forward in 2 separate groups. They did not mix together. Every day when they set up camp, they would arrange the snowmobiles in 2 rows and place them in the middle as a cordon. Zhang Hai was on the right and Louis Quezada was on the right. Both sides minded their own business and ate their own food. They did not trust each other, but they were together. This journey had been going on for 3 days now. Yes, it had been 3 days since Jiang Hai and the others set off from the scientific research station. During these 3 days, Jiang Hai and the others had been moving towards their goal. Because there was no place to rest, Jiang Hai and the others spent the rest of their time on the snowmobiles, except for when they set up camp. According to the calculation, they ran for 13 hours a day, 80 kilometers an hour. That was more than 1,000 kilometers a day. Of course, they were not walking in a straight line. The road to the South Pole was not completely flat. There were many snow valleys, glaciers, and snow mountains. Sometimes Jiang Hai and the others had to jump over them. Sometimes Jiang Hai and the others had to go around them. All of these took time. But even so, 3 days had passed, and Jiang Hai and the others had advanced about 4/5 of the way. After jumping over the plain in front of them, they should be near the mountain that was destroyed by the high-altitude landing plan. That was their goal. Walking into the tent, Jiang Hai saw that his people were also busy. Wallace Shelley was fiddling with her electronic equipment. These things were to ensure that Jiang Hai would have the ability to walk out of here if he fell out with Louis Cazada. She had to be careful. Bell Lester was wiping his gun. He had been running for the past few days, but he did not look tired. After all, he used to be from the Triangular State. Although he had never been to the South Pole, he must have undergone a lot of training. Knerson Peters was doing push-ups. To him, only by exercising his body could he protect Jiang Hai. Azalina and Galena were in front of a pot, boiling the melted snow inside. Beside them were penguins that were only left with fat and skin. Of course, there were still a lot of feathers on the skin. The feathers on the penguins were indeed feathers, not animal fur. However, these feathers were very small and looked like fine scales. The insulation effect was okay, but not very good. The biggest function of the feathers was waterproof and reduce underwater resistance. As Jiang Hai and the others went deeper and deeper into the South Pole, there was no water in the vicinity. There was ice and snow everywhere. Occasionally, there would be some water caves and the like. Under such circumstances, most creatures would find it difficult to live here. Therefore, there were many seabirds in the periphery of the South Pole, such as seagulls and other creatures, but they had completely disappeared here. In the past 3 days, Jiang Hai could count the number of seals he saw with his fingers. The only thing that was more abundant was the penguins. Jiang Hai had seen a lot of penguins, and he also knew some of the habits of these creatures. To be honest, penguins have a lot of fans both in China and abroad. However, this kind of creature is really a kind of creature. This kind of creature is very sneaky. It often steals things or attacks humans or other creatures. Moreover, although they lived together, their social relationships were very chaotic. The penguins in the South Pole were all lascivious thieves and sluts. Although they were monogamous on the surface, as long as the two were separated, they would do that kind of thing crazily. Even the seals were led astray by the penguins. Originally, the seals caught the penguins to eat, but now the seals sometimes caught the penguins to play. Needless to say, although the penguins were different species, the most important thing was to get into the penguins. Therefore, the parents of penguins took turns to incubate the eggs. When the female incubated the eggs, the male would go out to look for food, and then go crazy. Asterisk cough, asterisk, asterisk cough, asterisk. When the male incubated the eggs, the female would go out to look for food, and then go crazy. Asterisk cough, asterisk, asterisk cough, asterisk. This was the reality. Most penguins, while raising their own children, would also break other penguins' eggs and bite other penguins' chicks to death. These were all seen by Jiang Hai with his own eyes. Therefore, penguins were really bad creatures. Jiang Hai had also said before that this kind of creature was actually quite bad. However, once, when Jiang Hai and Xiao Bai went out to play, they caught a penguin back. Jiang Hai wanted to try it out, so he cooked it and ate it. In the end, he found that if only the lean meat inside was eaten, the taste was actually not bad, but it was a little too fishy. However, this was easy to solve. Jiang Hai brought wine and ginger, which were all things to remove the fishy smell. The penguin meat cooked with these things tasted good, and it had a kind of beef and mutton taste. Of course, there was no way to eat the fat. The skin, claws, and head were all inedible. However, in this kind of weather, being able to eat a bite of fresh meat was also a good enjoyment. Zhang Hai and the others had been eating like this for 2 days. Soon, Azalina and Galina finished cooking the pot of penguin meat. After quietly throwing away the soup, they boiled a new pot of water and threw the penguin meat, dried vegetables, and other things into the pot. As the water in the pot boiled again, the smell of broth filled the tent. Smelling this smell, everyone's eyes also focused on it. As the broth was ready, Azalina also gave everyone a big bowl of broth. Little Huang and Xiao Bai also had a bowl each. Then, with the compressed biscuits, Zhang Hai and the others also started eating. They should be arriving soon. Azalina asked Zhang Hai while eating. Well, they should be arriving soon. Abel nodded. According to Louis Cazada, they should be arriving tomorrow. Then we have to be careful. Galina also looked at Azalina and said after hearing what Zhang Hai said. Don't worry, they won't have the guts to touch us before they find out anything. Hearing what she said, Zhang Hai also smiled and said, he was telling the truth. For a privileged person like him, there was really nothing to be afraid of. There's no harm in being careful, boss. At this time, Bell smiled at the side. He still supported Galina's statement. Well, there's no harm in being careful. Hearing Bell's words, Zhang Hai nodded. There's no harm in being careful. Soon, everyone finished the food in front of them, and then Bell and Knursen Peters returned to their tent. Little Huang and Xiao Bai also ran outside the tent sensibly. They will be on guard nearby, and will come back to sleep during the day tomorrow. Compared to being on guard, they are actually more dutiful. Then, only Zhang Hai and the other 3 were left in the tent. Of course, this is the Great South Pole. Zhang Hai is not crazy enough to make children in the tent, but rubbing and hugging are inevitable, and they're more used to this. After changing his clothes, Zhang Hai hugged the 3 girls and fell asleep. The night passed without any words. The next morning, Azalina heated a pot of water again. After everyone washed up, they looked at the direction of the wind. After all, it was summer. Although the wind was about level 7, they could still walk. After putting on their equipment and packing their things, Zhang Hai and the others rode their snowmobiles, jumped over the snowy peak in front of them, and headed towards the plains in front of them. Along the way, everyone's speed was not slow, and they soon rushed to the plains. However, as the old saying goes, looking at a mountain is close enough to kill a horse. Nothing can be done based on the scenery on the plains. Therefore, even though the mountain did not seem far away, Zhang Hai and the others ran from dawn to dusk before they arrived at this place. After arriving here, both Louis Cazada and Zhang Hai breathed a sigh of relief. For the whole day, they did not rest except for a short break when they had lunch. They kept running and finally arrived. After arriving at the snowy peak, Louis Cazada looked at Zhang Hai and said in a low voice, according to the information on the map, the entrance to the underground city is halfway up the mountain. Are we going tonight or tomorrow? If I say that we'll go tomorrow, will you believe me? Glancing at Louis Cazada, Zhang Hai smiled and said. To be honest, since they were already here, it was impossible for Zhang Hai not to want to go directly. Oh, I don't really believe you. Then, let's spend the night in the cave at the entrance. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Louis Cazada also laughed. As he said, he did not believe that Zhang Hai would not sneak up. In this case, instead of following Zhang Hai after knowing that he had sneaked out, it was better to go in together. He was really curious. What did Zhang Hai want to do? Then let's go. Since it had been decided, Zhang Hai did not say much. With a wave of his hand, the people around him started the snowmobiles one by one and rode towards the direction of the mountain. Although the speed of climbing up the mountain was much slower, it was fortunate that the mountain was very short. It was only about 3,000 meters, and the position halfway up the mountain was more than 1,000 meters. Although the higher they went, the stronger the wind and the colder it became, everyone could still barely hold on. Finally, before the sky was completely dark, Zhang Hai and the others arrived halfway up the mountain. At this moment, what entered their eyes was a huge cave. Chapter 952. Looking at the huge cave in front of him, Zhang Hai swallowed a mouthful of saliva and asked in a low voice, "Is this it?" "Well, this is it." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Louis Quezada glanced at the GPS in his hand and said with certainty. At the same time, he also swallowed a mouthful of saliva because the cave in front of him looked really eye-catching. The discovery of this cave was quite accidental. During the United States high-altitude landing operation, a plane happened to hit this snowy mountain and then fell not far away from the mountainside. The model of that plane was R-4D. Everyone may not be familiar with this name because this plane was also built during World War II. However, it belonged to the Army and did not appear many times. After all, the United States Army did not send many of them out. Most of them were from the Navy, and the Navy's plane was called the C-47. When the United States joined the war, they got a lot of these planes and flew them all over the world. The British called this plane the Dakota, the Huaxia called it the Miling, and the Europeans during the European War also called it the Albatross. At that time, more than 80% of the planes used in the United States airborne operations were this kind of plane, so it was not an exaggeration to say that this plane changed the course of World War II. During the United States airborne operations, an R-4D plane fell here. There were a total of 9 people on the plane, but in fact, all 9 of them were still alive. However, after 3 of them found this cave, they wanted to go in alone to take a look. Then they were killed. Of course, this incident was not reported. Otherwise, why would 3 people die inexplicably when the pilot, who was severely burned, survived? Later, these people relied on 2 cans of peanut butter hidden by one of their comrades to wait for the rescue team to arrive. This cave was then discovered by the Americans. However, after the Americans went in, they found that it was actually just a military base. There were many empty buildings and materials inside, but no people. It seemed that the theory that Hitler fled here was not correct. Later, they emptied the research materials here and started a Cold War with the Soviets. That was how things unfolded. But this time, it was Zhang Hai and the others who came. Looking at the cave in front of them, Zhang Hai and the others were not in a hurry to go in because no one knew what was going on inside. Zhang Hai pulled Xiao Huang and Xiao Bai, who were clearly a little impatient, and exchanged glances with Louis Quezada. The 2 of them were not in a hurry to go in. Instead, they set up camp here. If there was anything, they could talk about it after tonight. Since the cave was right in front of them, Zhang Hai was not in a hurry, and Louis Quezada was even less anxious. Just like a few nights ago, the 6 motorcycles lined up in a row, blocking the middle. Then, Zhang Hai and the others went to sleep in separate tents. Although Zhang Hai kept dreaming that night, he was really curious about this place. But he did not go in alone. The next morning, after Zhang Hai and Louis Quezada finished packing up, they walked into the cave. This cave was obviously dug by humans, but it should have been here a long time ago. Zhang Hai and the others were still very orderly. After all, there were more than 1 or 2 people who knew about military affairs here. The 2 dogs, Xiao Huang and Xiao Bai, took the lead. They carried flashlights and hat lamps and went in to explore. Zhang Hai was quite confident in his 2 dogs. With their level and strength, they were far from being harmed by ordinary traps. If there were any accidents, they could deal with them and even wait for Zhang Hai and the others to arrive. Even if they could not, they could still retreat. This was something that Zhang Hai was very confident in. Then came Knerson Peters and Isaac Williams. The 2 of them were in front, followed by Wallace Shelley and Jittered Maud. Zhang Hai, Galena, and Bell were on the left, while Louis Quezada and Keys Leslie were on the right. Azalina and Quezada Hall were at the end of the group, keeping an eye on the situation outside. Each of them had 2 flashlights, one on top of their heads and one tied to their guns. They illuminated the dark parts of the cave, making it as bright as day. The further they went, the deeper they felt the cave was. I can see that the Third Reich was really powerful back then. If it had really unified Europe and Soviet Russia, the situation in the world would probably be completely different now. Louis Quezada also looked at the wall beside him. Thinking about how someone could dig such a cave in the Antarctic 70 years ago, he felt that it was a little unbelievable. At least, it was hard for him to imagine. The problem is that he lost. In fact, there is nothing bad about the current world, right? Hearing Louis Quezada's words, Zhang Hai smiled. He did not care about history, nor did he care about which empire was the strongest. He only cared about himself. You could say that he was selfish, you could say that he was shameless, and you could say that he was unpatriotic. In fact, the only person Zhang Hai loved was himself. Other than himself, there were only those who were related to him. Beyond these people, there would be countries, nations, and so on. These were the life values of an ordinary person. You could not use any moral standards to kidnap him because he did not care about you at all. He was no longer a hot-blooded 17 or 18-year-old young man. His blood had long since turned cold. Well, although I don't want to admit it, you are right, Louis Quezada said in a low voice as he shrugged. Woof, 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 woof. At this moment, a few dog barks came from afar. It was neither fast nor slow. After hearing it, Zhang Hai nodded secretly. This was also his, Goldie's, and Xiao Bai's secret signal. If they encountered an enemy that they could not defeat, they would retreat quietly. If they were discovered, they would bark quickly. If there was no danger and they had reached the end, they would bark slowly to remind Zhang Hai and the others. Now that the two dogs were barking slowly, Zhang Hai knew that there would be no problem. So he also quickened his pace and walked inside. As they turned a corner in the cave, a huge metal door appeared in front of Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai and the others could not help but stop and look at the door with a shocked expression. This giant door was really big, about 7 or 8 meters tall. It was made of pure metal. In this cave, at the same time, it looked gloomy, but at the same time, there was a sense of deterrence. In the middle of the door, there was a huge symbol of a reverse cross standing there. However, perhaps because it was too old, a lot of paint had fallen off on the anti-cross sign. It was faintly black, but overall, it was still gray. At this time, Goldie and Xiao Bai were in front of the door. When they saw Zhang Hai and the others coming, they stopped barking and sniffed around. What should we do now? Looking at the door in front of him, Zhang Hai walked over and gently patted the metal door. He heard a clanging sound, then turned his head and looked at Louis Quezada. According to the information, this door can only be opened with a mechanism. Let me see. It should be here. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Louis Quezada thought for a while and began to look around. Sure enough, it didn't take long for him to find a protruding stone. If he looked carefully, he would find a very hidden circle on the stone. This was the mechanism to enter the door. Seeing this, Louis Quezada couldn't help but press his right hand on it. Unfortunately, the mechanism he had imagined would be triggered, and the door did not open. Perhaps it was because it was too old, rusted, or frozen. In short, Louis Quezada's face turned red, but the door did not move at all. Let me try. Seeing that his boss could not do it, Habakkuk Hall also went over, but unfortunately, it was still useless. Then, Sears Leslie and Isaac Williams also tried, but the result was no use. Looking at them, Zhang Hai could not stand it anymore. He walked over and motioned for Isaac Williams to move aside. To be honest, the three people from the CIB were not very optimistic about Zhang Hai. In their opinion, other than being rich, Zhang Hai did not have any other abilities. The ones they really needed to pay attention to in this team were Belle from the Triangular State and Azalina. Of course, they had to be especially careful of Knerson Peters in close combat. This guy's close combat ability was not bad. If they were to rank the danger level of Zhang Hai's team, Azalina, a former agent and assassin, would be number 1. Bale, a soldier of the Triangular State, would be number 2. Galina Vasilkaya would be number 3. Knerson Peters would be number 4, and Wallace Shelley would be number 5.
What?
Not Zhang Hai. Xiao Bai would be 6th, Xiao Huang would be 7th, and Zhang Hai would be 8th. If Zhang Hai knew what they were thinking, he would probably kill them. But because Zhang Hai was rich, Isaac did not say anything and just backed away. He also wanted to see Jiang Hai lose face. However, to his disappointment, when Jiang Hai put his hand on the stone, he could feel that the inside of the stone was rusted to death. For an average person, there was no way to move it. Unfortunately, he was not an average person. Gritting his teeth, Jiang Hai's physical fitness, which was 8 times that of an ordinary person's, burst forth in an instant. Jiang Hai's hand forcibly pushed the rusty mechanism an inch further in. Then he exerted more force and pushed it another inch. Even with this last inch, he was able to force open a gap in the door in front of him. Although the gap wasn't big, it wasn't a problem for a person to walk in.
Phew.
Let's go. Looking at the door stuck there, Jiang Hai also let go of his hand and said with a sigh of relief. Seeing Jiang Hai open the door like this, Louis Quezada and the others were stunned. Chapter 953. Who the hell? Born with divine strength? Looking at Jiang Hai opening the door, Louis Quezada and the others were stunned. Among them, Habakkuk Hall looked at Jiang Hai in surprise. He didn't expect Jiang Hai to have such divine strength. Just now, they saw clearly that Jiang Hai didn't use any tricks, he just used his strength to push the switch in. For them, how could this be possible? It was too cruel. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai just smiled, then signaled the 2 dogs to go in first. After waiting for a while, after hearing the 2 dogs barking, Jiang Hai and the others also went in. After Jiang Hai and the others went in, Louis Quezada and the others immediately followed. But after entering the door, Jiang Hai and the others couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Because after walking in, you will find that there is actually nothing here. This is just a very large hall, very large. In the entire hall, there are many tables and chairs, but these tables and chairs are now frozen. Although there is a lot of dust on them, they are not rotten. In the middle of the hall, there is a platform that looks like a speech platform. On top of it, there is a red reverse cross with black words, representing who owns this place. The entire space is gray, as if it can't be washed clean. Other than that, there is nothing else here. It really looks very ordinary. Boss, there is a distribution map here. At this time, Belle looked around in the distance, then said to Jiang Hai. Hearing Belle's words, Jiang Hai and the others looked at each other, then walked over and checked it. The internal distribution map here is engraved on a huge stone, which will not be destroyed by the passage of time. The distribution map on the stone is very deep and obvious. Jiang Hai and the others should be in the main hall now. In addition to the main hall, there is a rest area, living area, planting area, information area, and military area. Rather than calling it an underground fortress, it would be more appropriate to call it an underground city. Back then, when the Germans built this place, it seemed like they were really going to use it as a place to live. Not only were there troops stationed here, but there were also civilians and scientists. It seemed like the Chancellor was really going to move the elites of the Third Reich here. There's almost no important information here. Basically, all the important information has been taken away by the Federation. Looking at the map, Louis Quezada said to Jiang Hai. Indeed, there is no information on this map. Whether it was about weapons or people's livelihood, the Americans would not stay. Let's go take a look. However, it was a pity that Jiang Hai didn't want weapons, nor did he want people's livelihood. What he wanted was information about the totem. If they didn't have it here, then it would be troublesome for him to get it from the United States. What they wanted was most likely Jiang Hai's farming methods. At that time, he would have no choice but to give up. After preparing for the worst, Jiang Hai's first step was to go to the reference room. According to what was written on the map, the reference room was behind the plantation area. To go to the reference room, they must first go to the plantation area. Jiang Hai and the others walked towards the plantation area first. After passing through a gate and a long corridor, the plantation area appeared in front of Jiang Hai. Looking at the plantation area in front of them, Jiang Hai and the others couldn't help but feel a little surprised. This was because the plantation area was really big. At a glance, it wasn't small at all. Most importantly, this was only one plantation area. According to the map, there were almost 20 such plantation areas. According to Zhang Hai's estimation, this place was about 500 acres, which was about 2 square kilometers in size. 20 of them would be 40 square kilometers in size. He had to admit that these Germans were really powerful. They could actually make so much space in the ice and snow of Antarctica. In fact, 70 years later, this would definitely be a huge project. But 70 years ago, the Germans quietly made such a thing. It was really terrifying. The soil here is so fertile. Knursen Peters, who had been following Harriman Fells in the fields these days, squatted down and grabbed a handful of soil. He couldn't help but feel surprised. This was underground, not above ground. So although the temperature was low, it wasn't as low as above ground. The water vapor didn't completely freeze. Although he didn't know where the soil came from, in Zhang Hai's view, the soil here wasn't worse than the soil in Zhang Hai's hometown in the northeast. The soil here could be kneaded into a ball with just a light pinch. Moreover, it was not like mud. This was soil because if you shook it again, the soil would scatter. This was completely different from yellow soil and sand. This was the most suitable black soil for farming. This soil has been untouched for more than 70 years. It would be strange if it wasn't fertile. Hearing Knursen Peters' words, Louis Quezada also looked at the soil and said with a smile. Then Zhang Hai and the others no longer bothered about the soil problem and continued to walk inside. They had to admit that the Germans were really creative. The planting areas later were actually different. Some were smaller and were surrounded one by one. They should be used to raise chickens or pigs. There were also some puddles that should be used to raise fish. As for the land that Zhang Hai saw at the beginning, it should be used to grow wheat. It was known that foreigners like to eat bread and not rice, so their main food source was wheat. After walking through these planting areas, Zhang Hai and the others came to the reference room from afar. But when he walked in, he found that the place was much messier than the outside. There were dust and smashed tables and chairs everywhere. There were also a lot of papers on the ground. It was a mess because when the Americans found this place, February was almost over. They had to rush back before February to transport the important things here. The reference room was naturally the most important, so they took the most important materials and left in a panic. Some of the less important materials were scattered here. For them, these things were nothing. After Zhang Hai walked into the reference room, he picked up a piece of paper and patted off the dust on it. Zhang Hai looked at it carefully. As a result, after reading a few lines, he threw the paper away. It turned out to be a poem praising Hitler and the Führer. Zhang Hai had nothing to say about it. He was not here to look for this thing. Mr. Zhang, what are you looking for? Do you need our help? Seeing Zhang Hai bend down and pick up a piece of paper again, Louis Quezada couldn't help but ask Zhang Hai with a smile. However, Zhang Hai shook his head. What a joke. How could he tell him what he wanted? So, he flatly refused. Seeing that Zhang Hai didn't want to talk to him, Louis Quezada just shrugged his shoulders indifferently. Since Zhang Hai had already decided, then he might as well listen to him. Then he took his people and casually browsed through the information in the room. At the same time, he couldn't help but sigh. Germany was still very powerful in the past. If it wasn't for them seeking death, then perhaps the situation of the world would be different now. In fact, if one wasn't in the position, one shouldn't meddle in politics. Looking at it now, the biggest problem with Germany's strategy was that they didn't destroy the United Kingdom and unify Europe first. Instead, they went to attack Russia. After all, there were too few Germans, so the initial elites were quickly defeated. The logistics couldn't keep up, and the rhythm couldn't be set. This slowly became troublesome. But in fact, there were also scholars who said that Germany had no choice but to do so. After the end of World War I, Germany's economy had already been destroyed by Europe. After Hitler came to power, although the economy recovered a little, the nature of the people was still very bad. They needed to occupy more land and more living space to stimulate their national pride and strong combat power. As the saying went, it was just drawing a big picture to make the people proud and stimulate their combat power. That was all. When they attacked Europe, they actually did well in the beginning. But when they attacked the United Kingdom, there were some problems. At that time, the world's strongest country was not so easy to defeat. The United Kingdom was an island country. Yes, it was not connected to the European continent. If they wanted to attack the United Kingdom, they would need to cross the sea. However, Germany's army was invincible. How could their navy compete with the United Kingdom, the world's #1 country? So, after the evacuation of Dunkirk, Germany was actually unable to attack the United Kingdom. The bombing of London was just for show, to dispel their feelings of resistance. As long as the British did not surrender, the Germans could not do much. However, the domestic economy needed to be stimulated by continuous victories. Therefore, the Germans had no choice but to give up on the British and turn to attack Soviet Russia. However, Soviet Russia was bitterly cold. During the summer, everything would be fine, but it would be over in the winter. At that time, Germany's main tactic was not to push, but to use blitzkrieg and mechanized troops to push forward. But once it was winter, the petrol would freeze, and tanks would need a few hours to move. Under such circumstances, a bicycle or a horse could run dozens of times faster than a tank. How could you fight? So, when winter came, Germany was at a loss. Originally, Operation Typhoon was going well, and they had occupied a lot of territory. But they were blocked by the cold and could not advance. So, the problem of attacking the United Kingdom came again. If there was no way to win, then there was no way to stimulate the enthusiasm of the people, and there was no way to prevent the economy from collapsing. Therefore, they could only open up a third route. These were all things that they had no choice but to do. Back then, Germany was more like the ancient nomads. They had to use war to support war. Once they failed, they would be finished. This was also the main reason for their failure. Of course, Italy was weak, and Japan did not restrain the Soviet Union. Instead, they provoked the United States. When all these factors were added together, it led to the destruction of the Third Reich. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.